Really? Why? Ready?
Yep, I got it.
Tomorrow or after?
Coming up on the PowerPoint. When I
Apparently,
watched,
apparently this
yes.
can't.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Rick Weiler, and I'm one of the supervisors here in Trinity County. And I'm going to be facilitating and hosting tonight, but we're going to hear from lots of others, and mostly we want to hear from you. And we're going to start by having sort of a walkthrough of what is actually this update process about, and what have we done. And then we'll talk about all the opportunities there will be for public comment, including, of course, tonight. That's going to not take a whole lot of time, because what we really want to do is save most of the time to hear from you about your feedback on what we put out there about the update and the proposed updates. So that's kind of the format we're going to have. We do have this, hopefully, if the internet's working well enough, streaming via Zoom, and tried to kind of communicate to people that for Zoom participants, it's mostly going to be observation, because we're set up here to engage you who are here physically with us. And they can leave comments in the chat section, and we will capture those as part of their input. I'll be capturing input on the flip chart, and we'll keep kind of track of what we're hearing from people along the way. And again, there'll be some group interaction so that we know what's going on and how people are feeling about what's being heard and said. I did want to introduce your hosts, if you will, tonight. So we have Trent, who is, oh, there he is. So our CAO, Trent Tuthill, is here, and he'll have something to say in just a moment. And then Drew, the director of our cannabis division, Bella, who really does all the work, but Drew takes credit for it. And Vidette, who has helped set us up tonight. And then with me is on the Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee. So there's been a couple of board members working with staff on this for some time. And Dan Frazier is another one of our supervisors who's here and has been actively participating in that process. Also with us tonight is Liam Gogan, who's a third supervisor. And some people might be automatically saying, uh-oh, Brown Act concerned, because there's the rules about 3 supervisors. But the difference is Liam is only here to observe. So even if you ask him a question, he can't answer because he cannot engage. tonight because Dan and I were here to do that, but he can observe and he wanted to. So just so everybody's understanding what's going on here, we're glad that he can be here. There'll probably be people coming in as we go, but we really want to get started to respect the folks that got here on the time that was scheduled. We are set to go as long as 9 o'clock. We just want to make sure there's plenty of time to hear what you have to say. And we'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. But if we're ready, Trent, did you want to go ahead and have a couple words before we get started?
Thanks, Rick. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody that's come out tonight. This is really intended to get the involvement from the public and enhance the product that you and his team has already put a lot of time and effort into, a lot of thought. And the objective is to make the overall program better. Better for everybody involved, better for the growers, better for the staff, better for enforcement mechanisms, overall just a better program. Not saying it's bad right now, but just try to make it better and easier for all of us to look through. There's been some frustrations over the years, and we're just trying to correct a lot of those. And I think what we will see and what we will do between this meeting and the next two, and then another couple of months before we actually bring this to the board, it's going to be a refinement process. So we're really looking forward to your comments and your engagement. You can do that tonight, and then there's other mechanisms that we continue to have that. That's really what we're asking. Thank you.
Drew, start us off.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, your comments, and check out our presentation. We're going to go to the third slide, because Rick started taking care of the
Getting there. Yeah. Sorry, didn't go. Sorry, y'all. Give me a second.
While we're getting that settled, there were about 10 printed copies, and we didn't know how many would be here and assumed a lot of people had already seen these because they've been published. But there are 10 copies floating around, and of course we can bring stuff up probably on the screen if we need to. And we have them over here if we need to reference something. And then you might have also noticed that there's some comment cards back there. So as we do engage in conversation, some people may be perfectly happy to raise their hand and say something. Others might want to share their comment written, and then we'll pick it up, and then they'll let me know if it's a comment that is relevant to what we're discussing in the moment. So lots of ways that we can get your input. Are we ready? Okay.
All right, can everyone read that?
No, I can't.
All right, so I'm gonna, do my best to present this in a consolidated fashion so that, we get through this section and we can have more time to receive comments. But essentially this slide is the workshop agenda. And so I'm just going to run through it if you guys can't all read it, but essentially what I'm going to present right now is an introduction and agenda overview, and then history and purpose of the cannabis ordinances, overview of the current ordinances, an overview of the problems and proposed solutions, and a proposed timeline for ordinance amendments, and then opportunities for public input. And then we're going to stop there. I'm going to turn it back over to Rick. So if you go to the next slide. And also, if you guys looked at the document that was online, this information here was also presented to you in the executive summary. So a lot of this is just represented the information that you already have online. So, quickly, the history of the Trinity County Cannabis Program began in 2016. And since then, multiple amendments and updated ordinances have occurred, including the adoption of 9 subsequent standalone ordinances. The most recent ordinance update was related to the adoption of the final EIR in 2020. And so, imagine most of you know, but that second section of the slide is this, the purpose of the ordinance is to establish commercial cannabis permitting programs. So that was the original intent of the original ordinance to have a cannabis ordinance in the county. And the concept is just to allow for a variety of cannabis activities while protecting public health and safety and welfare, and creating an effective regulatory program with enforcement controls. So that's kind of the concept. One of the main things that we keyed in on and really tried to incorporate into the framework of this ordinance update is sort of differentiating where previously we've used the term license both at the county level and at the state level. And so that bottom section of the slide, we're just kind of pointing out that the county's responsibility is land use. And then we also actively agency for CEQA compliance versus the DCC responsibility, which is, you know, state regulations and actually county's license. So one of the main things is to sort of differentiate permits versus licenses as going forward. We will be referring to what we previously referred to as licenses as cannabis permits. Next slide. So here we have sort of an overview of, on the left hand there, the 10 county ordinances that regulate commercial cannabis. So we started off with 1743 originally as the commercial cannabis cultivation regulation, or maybe started as an emergency ordinance with a different number, but then was adopted to 1743. And then we have wholesale cannabis nurseries, distribution, testing, non-storefront retail, micro business, manufacturing, and then 1743G was codifying the mitigation measures and performance standards. 1743H was cannabis storefront retail, and the last one was the cannabis processor and processing. And so on the right hand, what you see is sort of the general layout of all of the ordinances. And they follow that general framework, purpose, definition, application, regulation, performance standards, required findings, required conditions, mitigation measures, denial, revocation, enforcement, and fees. And so one of the main things that we've done in these updates is to try to consolidate a lot of the redundant sections into overarching sections for the entirety of all the ordinances, which now include all 10 of those previously separate ordinances. We can go to the next slide. Well, that's impossible for that. So this is a slide showing the overview of problems and proposed solutions. Rick, you want me to read these all verbatim to the crowd? Or?
I think you just sort of highlight.
Okay, so one of the big things, you know, that I've already referenced is consolidation. And so we've taken all the redundant sections and many of them and consolidated them. There were also inconsistencies and missing information between the different subsections, regulations, and definitions. We've also ran into issues with conflicting definitions and terms that weren't defined. There's also reference to outdated state and other regulatory agencies and requirements. Let's see what else. There's sort of, it lacks clear pathways for implementation and enforcement of the regulation in many cases. So we've proposed new standards under the enforcement and suspension, denial, revocation, fines section. We've also, you know, identified that there was a lack of criteria for appeals. So we established criteria for appeals to mitigate the sort of appeals that have more funding basis, and then not take out staff and necessarily. Let's see what else we added. We also added something we took note of the fact that there was no ability to transfer a license from someone that had been deceased. So that's something we addressed. One of the other big changes is sort of converting the existing commercial cannabis variance process, the acronym we refer to it as a CCB, to a buffer. And so one of the sort of things that's been identified is that a setback is intended to be from a property line to an element within that parcel, whereas a buffer can establish distance between the element on one parcel and the element on the other. And so we basically established a new buffer concept to replace the CCD concept. And rather than it being an annual renewal process, we proposed to be an administrative one-time buffer reduction. So once you receive that buffer reduction, it stays with the project, and the project is active. And also essentially added the same ability for people to appeal, oppose the CCD, whereas if the neighbor gives opposition to the project, then rather than it being an administrative approval, it will go to the planning commission for them to approve the budget reduction, similar to the current CCD process.
Andrew,
Yeah.
I've got a message that they can't hear you, so you might need to look and project into the owl a little better.
That's almost the end of the list. I can stand here if that's good.
Very muddled, you said. Very muddled.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the last one on the list really that I'm gonna highlight is that, you know, we established from the opt-out, or, you know, we basically are converting that to an exclusionary overlay zone and clearly establishing the process as to how communities can opt in and or opt out to that process. So I apologize to everyone who's online and couldn't hear me, but I think we're gonna proceed with the presentation. And I'll stand up here for the rest of it. So next slide, please. So this is just a timeline of, you know, basically the proposed timeline that we're working towards as our goal in terms of getting this adopted, or at least presented to the Board of Supervisors for their consideration before the end of the year. So we have tonight's meeting, tomorrow night's meeting in Weaverville, and then next Wednesday, October 4th. And then we're hoping to get it to the Planning Commission by October the 26th. So at that point, 72 hours at least before the Planning Commission hearing, the second draft will be released to the public, and then hoping to get it to the Board of Supervisors December 5th for the second reading. Next slide. And then here we just kind of, you know, go over again the public workshop schedule, the public hearing schedule. As I said, we're hoping to get it to the Planning Commission for October the 26th, to the Board of Supervisors December 5th. And there's a little asterisk there for those who can't read it, which says subject to change based on public input. So we've received, you know, significant amount of comments, and you know, the decision is made to take more time to incorporate it, then we will do that, you know, as directed. Also, for everyone in the room, you probably have already been told, but there are comment cards on the front table, or you can submit comments to cannabis.ordinance@trinitycounty.org. We are capturing all of those emails, and they can, you know, included for discussion topics as we go through and make updates and prepare a second draft. So at this point, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Rick. And we're going to go back to slide 3, I think, today.
Okay, apologies to those who were not able to hear too well on that. We will be covering the same material for next night and next week, so we'll have a chance to make sure you understand, but I think we'll also pretty much cover what you heard. We're giving an introduction. We can go back to that list.
Not that one?
Nope.
No.
The one that I was taking notes on. Keep going.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, it's a little hard to read here, but what we had done was identify some key areas that we thought you might want to give us feedback on. But we don't want to just make that assumption that that's what you want to focus your time on. So we want to get your feedback on that. So as you heard from Drew, the main areas that he identified that you might want to look at and give us feedback on tonight were first the consolidation, and Drew Bella, give me an idea. The current 10 different ordinances is 100 and some pages.
I want to say it was 70 or 80 when we combined them all.
Okay. Yeah, they're about like. And the new document is,
We're
48.
okay, so we were pushing a lot of different pages in part because we had so much redundancy. You had to look here for the same thing that you looked some other documents. So a big part of it was the effort to consolidate these into one big ordinance. So that's one area that we could dig into a little bit more tonight if you want. Another one was this issue that you heard Drew talk about of moving from license to permit, with the clarification that the DCC, which is the state entity, is actually the one issuing the licenses, and we are kind of revising our approach to make sure it's clear that we're doing the permitting, which is more land use and sequel oriented. The next part is identifying clearly the non-conforming uses, so that that's very clear in one section. Introducing stacking, so that that can be a part of our ordinance going forward. Drew mentioned land use buffers, which is kind of getting away from setbacks and things like that, and also moving away from every year that's kind of up for debate again. It's just once you get that approval of the right buffer zone from the work that's being done on that property to other properties, then it sticks. Overlay zones, we've talked about in the past and currently opt-outs, and at least some people are talking about opt-ins too. And so this is more talking about, let's create overlay zones instead of this terminology about opt-out and opt-in. It'll just be an overlay zone that says this is where it can and cannot happen. Allowable zoning is just another category of trying to get clear on where it can and can't happen. The appeal criteria. Enforcement, so there's some terminology in here and some ideas about how enforcement can be put in place that will have perhaps a better impact on the sort of fairness and accountability that we're hoping for out of the new program. There's a fees section, and then there can be whatever else that you want to talk about. So the first thing I want to do is find out, are there areas other than these that you would like to see us talk about tonight? Yes, Adrian.
It may not be for tonight, but TCA did submit a bunch of comments and several are addressed in here. But I would also like to bring up the manufacturing limitations on product acquisition. The product caps in micro business.
Okay, you're gonna have to go slower for me.
Okay, sorry.
Manufacturing limitations?
Yeah, limitations on product acquisition.
Okay. And the other one was micro business?
Yeah, limitations on product acquisition essentially also.
Okay. Okay,
There's in the manufacturing and distribution ordinance, there's arbitrary dates for applications. So it is that you have a wait on longer, great to right now.
is it specific to distribution?
And like when manufacturing,
Also both.
both manufacturing.
Okay, so I'll just put arbitrary,
So I have a list.
okay. Dates, okay,
And I'm gonna just pull out the ones that I think are most important for right now.
Yep.
I think that's it for now. I will submit more because it's just too much.
yes.
We go over some of the bigger definition changes, like this last year, like the update to what we can do for what one known as cannabis space.
Okay,
And kind of how it's been adapted to area change and like some of those key definitions.
Sure. okay,
One more that we should get to is the self-processing ordinance. The language seems to be stricken from this document.
okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, I would like you to talk about the cottage license type, like 5,000 square feet.
Okay. So
And I
the,
think that the 5,000 square feet license is not controlled by the state, but just under the county. So I just want to make sure that that is right.
okay. So I'm noting I haven't done a good job of repeating the comments from the audience. So I'll try to do that better for those who either can't hear the speaker or
Yeah.
are on Zoom. But this is about specifically the cottage licenses, and you referred to, or we'll call it permits. And this is for 5,000 square feet or smaller.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rick, would you
And
like-
I heard that the cottage license is not as heavy regulated as the 10,000 square feet. So I think that that will work for some people that don't want to go to the big license
Okay,
and work cultivate under the.
okay,
The
so we'll,
permit, yeah.
we'll add that to the list, and we're gonna ask people to kind of weigh in on where. Because we have a big list, where do you want to start? So you had something else?
No.
Oh, okay, you're just ready to jump in. Anybody else have something else they want to put on the list?
Zoom does. I have some
Zoom does, okay.
We got buffer zones, which I think,
Okay. That's already here on the list,
Okay.
right?
allowable zoning for
It's
compliance
already there.
TPZ. We want to comment on limitation on location and performance standards.
Performance standards, is that covered under any of these others or not? I'll just put it down.
And then want to know about type 3 tracking and parcel requirements.
Performance standards, type 3 versus that,
And parcel. requirements.
okay?
And limitation on location. As an
The
opt-out?
limit, yeah, I wanted to add a little clarity to the zone calculation. No new zones were added.
Bella, I think you're gonna really project.
Yeah.
Getting really close. What was that?
You might want to come up here, Bella.
Okay, I just wanted to add a little clarity there because we weren't proposing any new zones or changing zones. It was just that we converted the limitation on location for cultivation, which is known as allowable zoning in all the other ordinances. So we just made it uniform with the rest of the ordinances and had to kind of write it in a reverse fashion because the way that cultivation was written was where you couldn't have it and not where you can, which is a tradition for zoning.
The clarification, this is not change is what the work that's been done.
It's not, it wasn't the intent of.
Okay, but that would
It
be,
was just to
that,
add clarity. For uses are already.
and that subject though would be under allowable. Anything else? Here, we need the honor system for voting. What I want you to do is look at that list, and I'm gonna ask you to tell me your top 3. Because the ones that have the most votes are the ones to start with, and we'll keep working as long as we can, but we really want to hit the ones that are the most important to you tonight. So just think of it right now, and I'm gonna go through them one by one. Only raise your hand times. You only have 3 votes, but which are your most important? So I will start with consolidation. Is this one of your top 3 that you want to focus on? Okay, permits versus license. 1? Yes, okay. Non-conforming uses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Guys gone? Stacking. Not surprising. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm doing quick guesstimates, but about 20. Land use buffer. About the same. Okay, overlay zones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? Yeah, we may get to all of it. I just want to make sure we get the ones that are most important. Allowable zoning. That was one of them online. I see one vote back here, so I'll put at least 2 because we heard it come from online. Appeal criteria. 1, 2. Okay. Enforcement. Fees. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
I don't know if you
Other goes over here.
can hear us on Zoom, but I think there's been some input from Zoom callers also.
Are you guys seeing this on chat? You couldn't get in? So on chat, are you seeing,
Yeah, they have, so they're asking if they can comment.
if there's a bunch of hands that are going up about one particular thing, you can let me know, but again, and I'll just say this again for those folks to join us via Zoom. The way that we're set up for tonight and having really strong audience engagement is difficult to do with Zoom. So we've made sure that Zoom was here so you can observe, and we'll try to incorporate your input as much as possible, but we're not going to diminish the experience for those that are here, for those that are Zooming in. And there's 2 more opportunities to be in person. But do you see any kind of preponderance of chat comments that are for one area or another?
We're raising our hands, but I don't know to what, so just tell me what y'all are raising your hands to.
Okay, and I'll let you kind of collect those via chat, and then I'm gonna keep going with the folks here. So manufacturing limitations, how many people have that in their top 3? Adrian. We would say they have to be tonight. Great, okay, well, that's why I only gave you 3. Micro business, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Arbitrary dates. And again, doesn't mean we won't get to it. Definitions. 1, 2. That one of your 3?
Yeah, it's my 3rd.
Self-processing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The cottage permits. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, okay, thank you. Performance standards was brought up. Okay, and again, we might get some more here. Type 3 versus SAPI. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we already have stacking being covered, so maybe we can kind of hit it there. Okay, so there is some preponderance of something that we should capture.
1 for manufacturing.
Okay.
That's all I have conclusively at the moment.
Okay. Okay. All right, so again, we want to talk about what you want to talk about, but the 2 top that we want to dig into first are the stacking and the land use buffer. And I don't know, you were could have been 18 and 21. I'm not really clear. Let's start with the land use buffer. So the way that we want to do this is, again, I'll be capturing notes as we go, but what I'm expecting from you is you either have a question, you have a suggestion, or you have a concern. And so I'll take those in, turn to the experts, because I don't know the answers. And we'll get, if it's a question, we'll get an answer. If it's a concern, we want to document that. If you have a suggestion, we want to take it in, and then we'll see what other people have to say about your suggestion or your concern or so forth. So who wants to start? Oh, yeah, so you can go to the land use slide. Do you want to do an overview first before we start? Okay. Yeah, we have a slide on the ones that were already on our list, so we can give you a little bit of a starting point with those.
I'm going this way.
Okay. 13. Okay.
Are we there? Is that where you want, Bella?
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and Drew, Bella, whoever, give us an overview, but if you're gonna do it, come here, project, want people to hear it out there, and then we can take the questions or get the concerns.
All right, so I sort of covered, the highlights of this earlier when I went through the overview and sort of the various sections, but essentially the primary change is converting the term and the setback to buffer. And so I'll explain it again. It's a little bit confusing and it's taken me quite a while to wrap my head around it. But essentially, a setback requirement in traditional planning terms is from your property line to within your property. So the setback for buildings is in many cases 30 feet. from the property line. So that means you can't build any closer than 30 feet from your property. So that is a setback. And so the current variance process basically is set up as setback requirements from elements that are on adjacent parcels. So we've changed that to use the term buffer so that we can require a buffer, which is a distance, the same as a setback. However, it's a buffer between an element that is on your parcel in terms of the cultivation sites to an adjacent parcel. So a buffer between your cultivation elements and a nearby residence, or a buffer, which is a required distance between the cultivation elements and a church or a school. So that's pretty much the whole concept. Just to clarify that essentially we didn't make any changes to the existing distances that were referred to as setback requirements. We've just changed the terminology to require that distance be met through the use of the term and the application of the concept of buffer. So I guess I'll just open it up, Rick, for questions.
No.
Okay, good.
Project.
Yeah.
Also, we've all seen the pattern that, the larger license types aren't able to meet the 500-foot setback. So to recognize that most of them have asked for a variance in order to meet that, we've suggested removing. So. Yeah, and then, so through the administrative process, we've noticed that a large quantity of variances have went to the planning commission that haven't received opposition. So they're waiting in the queue due to the bottleneck of like staffing at the planning department. So in order to hopefully remedy that in the future, we're suggesting that you only go to the planning commission if there is opposition. So then it'll be approved administratively in-house by the director if there is only consent from your neighbors. And we've also already implemented a consent opposition form that goes out to your neighbors early on in the process and not later.
So now, again, questions, concerns, we'll just start with one and then we'll build on that. So, Ken?
I have a question, Rick.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is there a discussion or language on the buffer? I get the concept of it, so. Property A and property B, if you can go right to the border because you have an adequate buffer, whatever it is, 500 feet, whatever it may be. What happens if later on, property B, the buffer is maintained, but later on, property B wants to build some sort of whatever, whether it's a canopy, whether it's a shed, whether it's whatever. And now it breaks that buffer. The property A is now, they can't, that has a license, can't maintain that buffer because property owner B wants to build something near within that buffer.
Yeah. So again, just to make sure everybody online can hear this too, and we have, I know we've talked about this, I'll let these guys address how it's been worded, but the idea is that I'm the cultivator and I have my buffer between me and Vedette, but Vedette hasn't built her house yet. And now she builds her house within the standards of where she can from a permitting standpoint for building. And now it's gotten in between and we're too close. So what then happens? How does that got it? Okay, so what do we got as an answer?
We have exceptions and that would fall under the exceptions. So I'm just trying to find the exact language here. Because we've come up with those situations.
Cannabis permit types that are found to be less than the required buffer distance due to the construction of a sensitive receptor on an adjacent party control. And it's not under the same limit. It's not required to comply with the buffer distance under the non-conforming section. So it's like if you were there and your neighbor builds, you were there as a non-conforming. So your neighbor can't build and then ask you to move. Which is kind of a planning board that would be.
So the neighbor wouldn't be restricted by the buffer that property A.
No, you can use your property, it would just be that you couldn't go build a house inside that buffer and then ask that your neighbor to comply.
Right. But it's not gonna.
It would be a non-conforming.
It's not gonna restrict you because of their life.
No.
Right.
It's not correct for fees, it's like, we're gonna feel or. extra variance or anything, we talk about it. That would lead it to be a field criteria, but there's no guarantee that they got a field.
But it would also be captured under pre-existing non-conforming, and so that's one of the things that overlays with.
It would give the licensee some sort of footing to do. This
Right,
would be
they're established, they're
intent.
existing.
So again, the thing that's kind of happening here is, Sue and I spent a lot of time in Arizona, and one of the things that happened there was people had a lot of horse farms. And then they sold off parts for residences, and then when the residents built their houses, they wanted the horse farms to go because they were too close and they made dust and they stank. And it was like, well, the horse farms were here first. So, it was one of those things, and so this is saying. If I'm the cultivator and I get approval to be this far, and then Vedette builds right there, which she legally can, fine, but that doesn't mean I have to change. And I guess what that means for somebody that's buying undeveloped land next to a cultivation property, you need to know what that buffer zone is and know that it's already established if it already is. So yes, sir.
The problem I have with non-conforming is what happens if the adjacent property is too small to build, let's say, a home outside of the buffer. And the person is a sensitive person. They own the property today. Permit goes in tomorrow, an adjacent property is well land. You want to build, you can't build outside of the buffer, but the size of the parcel. So you either have lost value of the property, you have to sell it. Because you can tell lines in the buffer.
So for folks on Zoom, and if you can't hear, the question is kind of like if I own that property next to a cultivation site and I haven't built yet, but now I want to build and there's nowhere for me to build on my site that is outside of that buffer and it's sensitive to me, then I'm restricted from the use of my property, so to speak, and potentially the retail value of my property if it can't be built if to somebody who has a similar concern. So that's your concern?
Well, yeah, I think you're elevating then the use of property by one person to the detriment of another existing property.
Okay.
Which is called condemnation, and I think creating a lot of problems.
Okay, so I'll take a shot at this and then Drew, but it would seem to me, again, our process is, if there is this kind of process early on now, when I'm making an application for a cultivation, that the nearby properties would be notified and be given an opportunity to weigh in that they have a concern, that would be that opportunity to address a concern before the buffer limit is set. But once it's set, it's set. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that I agree, and then just to, respond to your question, just to clarify, it doesn't in any way create a restriction in terms of where the adjacent property owner can build.
Depends on the size of the parcel, that's the problem.
No, sir.
It does, because if the person who owns the property gets the health problem, you can't build within the buffer. This is where the problem is, giving the buffer that is away from the property. The person has a setback instead of the buffer. From their property line where they can do the activity, the adjacent property is never going to affect.
You're saying if there was someone with health concerns
That owns property,
they would choose to not build within the buffer due to their health concerns?
I'm saying they build within what you're allowing the buffer.
They absolutely can do it, they may choose not to, and I understand your concern, but that there's no restriction on their ability to construct within their parcel.
Impairment, they use the property.
Setback.
As a matter of law, there's an impairment, they're using the property. Because you're creating a buffer, which affects their property. Because you're including their property in the buffer.
Which
As
then as far as,
setback,
okay.
which does not affect the adjacent property.
And so we're looking at it, I think, somewhat from the inverse of the way you're looking at it, but ultimately, what Rick said is that when that property goes out to be noticed for the approval of the license, that adjacent property owner would have the opportunity to oppose it and then take those concerns to the planning commission.
So this is what we're doing. We captured first of all kind of the question that he brought up, and then this specific follow-on concern. So we'll document this. So we'll have this. What I would like to know is, does anybody else have a question about this specific thing? Yes.
On Zoom.
I was curious how soon in the process the notice was out to the adjacent parcel.
Okay, so the question is this thing we talked about where we give this kind of earlier notice to adjacent property so that they can weigh in whether there's opposition or not. What are we talking about? How soon?
Well, so the current process is that when the director approves the project, then it goes out for public notice, neighbor noticing. And then there's a 10 business day appeal period. We could certainly consider including notifications at the time that the applications are received to give the adjacent property owners more time to oppose the development on the adjacent public.
So right now, I've already begun the variances that are going to the commission here in October. They've already received, or they've already rolled out the consent opposition letter as soon as it got on like that. Arbitrary, but as soon as we can get the application reviewed, we would want to send that out to know the trajectory of the project.
If you don't have a decision, what is there? You haven't decided, you just didn't.
Okay, it's not an
This-
appeal.
Yeah, at this point, it's not, the question is what if you don't have something to appeal, but this is not an appeal. This is just a notice of concern,
It's
an
a-
opposition.
It's a consent opposition form that's written by the county. And it lists out, you're welcome to list. It lists out, do you consent, do you oppose, do you live in your dwelling, do you, and then the reason why you oppose, and then they mail it back to us or drop it off, and then we'll know early on, because it wasn't working to have opposition at a couple of weeks before we went to the planning commission, because there wasn't any time to work things out or have discussions or learn what the true concerns are, really. So we started doing that the last couple of months.
And so a question that maybe is a follow-on to Lisa's is, it may not be an appeal, but what happened? I'm the person who filed opposition,
That'll go into the staff report as record.
okay?
And the first thing that I'll research is, do you actually own the parcel? Are you in the residence? It's up to them if they say the truth or not. And are you within the 350 foot buffer? Because if you're outside of the 350 foot buffer, you're not what is considered to, because there's. But, yeah, we want to know if you're within that buffer or outside that buffer, but we're only trying to nail those to the adjacent properties. Using your husband.
No,
Is
I
that-
thought you were saying when the application for a new license was received, you'll notify the neighbors before a decision is made. So that they would have the opportunity to oppose it even before the decision, because they think it's close to them.
Go ahead, Drew.
And so my understanding is that in terms of how commercial cultivation variances have been brought before the planning commission, there's been a few different iterations of kind of at what point in the process, that CCD was brought before the PC. So it is certainly a possibility that we, basically create that for projects that have this early on receiving opposition before, development happens, that opposition goes before the PC, before we even spend the time and staff resources to process the environmental document, if, that project is going to be opposed. So we could sort of flip-flop the order of how things are being done now and take that as sort of the first step for projects that receive opposition to the planning commission to see if that's approved before expending staff time and applicant dollars to try and process the environmental document.
So,
It'd be after they apply for the buffer reduction. Would be effective.
okay, so,
Since they don't. meet the
yeah.
buffer setback.
So the clarification I'm hearing is if I'm the cultivator and I have all the setbacks, buffer distances I need, then this really isn't an issue. If I potentially have an issue with that and there is opposition, that's captured early on and considered in the process so that before it would ever get to an appeal, that can be discussed, deliberated upon, and then move forward or
And
not.
so the applicant can consider it as well, if they want to go all the way to commission.
Okay, does that answer your question? Lisa? Okay, well, it sounded like you were asking that question.
I was just trying to figure out.
Okay.
Rick, can I just reference to see if anybody understands the clarification on that? Buffer,
근데 뭐, no, 아직 있어야 된다. 카페 가서 가서 zoning law.
And this one again, may move on to the next question. The moon now, your name one again, when my little Balamu, where I know coming makes up in the moment. But you will tell me about that. I guess everybody understand.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
We
Yeah,
got a question on,
okay, and then Carla, I know you had your hands up.
first of all, you can't understand the staff when you're at the table, so you do need to get up. Over here. Patrick says, how will this affect someone who already has a variance and is waiting to renew it for a type 3? Time, cost, and renewal applications? Will an existing variance consent and good standing apply moving forward?
Can we do a test to Zoom and see if you guys can hear me like this?
Is that wireless? A little out or?
Heard that, yep.
So the question was,
Here, hold on, I got it up here.
so yes, for existing CCVs, they would be converted in good standing. With neighbor consent, they would be converted to administrative buffer reduction, which would be a one-time approval, not requiring the same, differing from the current process, which is each year following the initial approval. The approval is done as a director's, as BUP. So this would just be a one-time administrative approval that would remain good for the life of the project.
This was, I think, what you just answered, but there's two questions there.
I don't think we can really fully answer Patrick's question until the warrant's through, because if the 500-foot setback was removed, then he wouldn't need to renew his variance ever again.
Patrick, were you able to hear that?
Okay, so the question, that second part was, will existing variance consent and good standing apply moving forward? Like, would that carry forward into this conversion to a buffer zone and one-time approval instead of entertaining?
That is the intent of that, of the change.
Okay, Carl.
I think you just answered my question, but my question was, is it possible that if you've already been to the planning commission, you already have a variance, that you could end up having to go to the planning commission a second time with your converted? But I think
That
you
is not-
just said
That is
that's
not the way we're proposing.
So
Would it open it back up to opposition another time?
The way that it's currently, the concept is that the current approved CCBs would convert to the administrative buffer reduction.
One-time approval.
So again, to make sure everybody's hearing that on line 2 is, if, what we're saying is if we're focused on cultivation, if that cultivation permit has an approved variance, and we've already determined as a county, we've used the term variance in the way that planning usually uses it. And so we're trying to move away from that, but if that's already approved, and right now we have to go through this every year and go over, it's a big administrative burden, we would just convert that to this approved buffer zone one time, and then it's there for the time that that project is in place. Any changes in that project then would instigate or require new efforts. Yes, Adrian.
Thanks. First of all, that was great, Zach. Thank you. Very, very well said. The definition, I think this is definitions, but it's also most certainly land buffer, of canopy. The historic definition for variances was the term cultivation area, but we built our ordinances before the state released their final language. And the intent of this has always been that the variance was from the canopy as described by the state, and not from the cultivation area, which could include, you know, an outlying building used for processing or something that. I think we all went through this in the suits fairly recently, so I think you guys probably know what I mean, like definition of where the buffer starts.
Yep, I totally follow what you're referring to, Adrian. Essentially, since we.
They can't hear you,
They can't hear me?
not back there.
Move your chair over
No.
Since we took that item to the planning commission with the attempt to clarify that, and it was not approved, we basically moved forward with the existing understanding of the definition in terms of, you know, where previously it was understood that it was from mature canopy was the required setback or buffer. Whereas now, given the PC's determination, when we brought that item forward, was that it would remain the additional cultivation related elements such as processing buildings, things like that. So that is reflected in this current ordinance to just maintain consistency with our current process and the current setback requirements for CCDs converted to buffers.
And Adrian, did I hear you say that that is in conflict with what was later issued by the state,
Well, it's more that we never updated our own definition.
right?
And so what we were doing fell into the, we called it cultivation area to begin with. And then when the state released, but active as if it were canopy. Once the state regulations came out, we were acting as if it was canopy up until recently. Whereas the cultivation area, which we use, was later defined by the state. And was in conflict with how we were implementing the setbacks.
Okay,
Rick,
so go ahead, Jim.
I just want to say, can I ask you if it's okay? I think this might be an area where it's helpful to pull the crowd again and on Zoom to see what concept they support.
Okay.
Right now, you know, we're kind of relying on the PC, but in terms of addressing this issue, whether we want to go back to the first historical concept or whether we want to maintain with the current interpretation, maybe we can get something.
Sure.
You know, for
And so let's just be real clear so everybody knows what they're voting on, and if you need to help me, please let me know to get the message for everyone to understand. What we're saying is that our current goes by cultivation area, which include, my canopy could be here, but my cultivation area includes all these other potential uses of the facility for the operation. And what was proposed was to change it to just mature canopy. You took that to the planning commission. The planning commission said, no, we don't like that. Am I saying that all right?
Yeah, I think the only thing to add would be that was where the program started in terms of my understanding that originally the CCDs were between mature canopy and adjacent land uses. So that's where it started. And then staff last year or the year before sometime basically reread the definition.
I remember. Now I'm remembering this. Okay, go ahead.
And basically clarify that the definition of cultivation includes things other than just canopy. And so therefore, the CCD was required to be set back. The setback requirement for the CCD was from outbuildings or other cultivation related elements, not just mature canopy.
And for the benefit of those that aren't cultivators, the other types of things that would be included.
Like a processing building, so basically other outbuildings, you know, that could be used for processing or immature canopy or.
The intent was anything that actually had like odor in their quality.
Okay. Okay, so
那个包哦，那个包里面还做了个好诶，还点好 canopy， mature canopy 些好诶 cultivation area， 那么你要还点 cultivation area 嘛，是说呀，只要到到我还个就是就是的这个照片，的这个来片，的这我你我以前去了也 consider not follow the cultivations area， 那 OK， 也了还做了好我。buffers 那个好诶，所以有冇要的cultivation area 那么多谁我不搞点的呢？好似係冇做咩嘅，呢個不點樣？誒不點的講的呢？呢個那個好有啲 consider 過的cultivation area， 那係啊，好呢個 stay 嘛，那係嘅，佢可能其實呢嘅，即係兩個大嘅冇咩嘅啦。I think that's it.
good. I have to trust you. So what I'm going to do is ask this question in the way that is kind of with a show of hands of what people would like to see reflected in the ordinance update. That it goes back to mature canopy, which is where it was originally implemented, whether written or not, implemented, and then changed cultivation area. Which do the people want to see? And what I'd like to do is say for the folks on Zoom, hopefully everybody knows how to raise your hand. So if you will raise your hand when I ask about the two different areas. So I'm going to first ask if you would help to, those who would like to see it return to the mature canopy, raise your hand.
And this idea got a car, she long idea, measure can it be not yet only enjoy the money, John would go about the Jason, get chat there.
1, 2, 3. And do we have a pretty good count?
We got 6 hands up,
Okay, so let's put 25 plus
7.
7. And then for cultivation area, raise your hand if you'd like it to be with how it's currently being addressed based on our interpretation of the current reading and apparently what the planning commission voted to keep in place. So raise your hand for that, and same for online.
Consider conservation area, John the god Jay, and it is the guy take your dad as you come with Jay Yarathon, not in what would get like a bean Jordan, the god generation, and the John. Jay, so Jay, you got Jay, look how I got dog only actually near shade or the child and Joe on the moon. You let this at the conveyor, what you know, Josh, you look on the Jay chat.
Okay, so cultivation, raise your hand. If you prefer to stay with cultivation. Any online?
Nope, not yet. Really good.
Okay, you're there, you got some feedback, and we can, what we'll try to do is as we go into these other public workshops, give other groups the chance to kind of weigh in on some of these same things, so we get a sense from the broader audience that we'll speak to over the 3 different meetings. Okay, someone over here, I thought had their hand up, but Adrian, go ahead.
I just wanted to note on this particular topic, and we were talking about drying buildings, processing, whatever, odor mitigations can be applied to those. So as far as the decision-making process goes, I think that's a very easy catch-all to allow us to go back to canopy.
Yeah, and which, as Bella was saying, it was kind of focused on those things that could be concerns from an odor sensitivity standpoint. And so your point is, if it's outbuildings, those could be mitigated through filtering and so on. Okay. Okay. So we are at 7 o'clock. And we're still on item 1. Are we ready to move on? Okay, so the next one was the stacking. So Drew, you know which slide we need today? You can look for the stacking. We'll give a quick overview and then dig in on that one.
It is 12.
Yeah, the stack one. Okay, Drew, you're gonna project from there or come up front?
Come up front.
Here's over there.
No, go ahead and take whatever one you got. I think it helps to have a. Some people may just want to talk about the subject, but not know where we are.
Okay, so, you know, right here, we sort of have a list of the stacking criteria. It's actually taken from the ordinance update, proposed ordinance updates. Essentially, you know, all of the applicable setback or buffer requirements would still apply to the additional stack licenses, sort of same as all of the existing licenses. And so that last question, you know, would really come into play in terms of what elements are required to buffer between adjacent land uses. And essentially, you know, the way that it's proposed currently is that if sites that wish to stack more than one cannabis permit, so for, let's say, an existing 10,000 square foot mixed light, if someone wanted to have a 5,000 square foot outdoor and a 5,000 square foot mixed light, they'd be able to have those 2 licenses together on the same parcel, or potentially add, you know, multiple small license types staying under their existing approved footprint. Would just be considered a small ministerial permit. And then for folks that want to stack additional licenses and go beyond the 10,000 square foot, essentially it would be a director's use permit for one additional license. So up to 20,000 square feet, 10 to 20,000 square feet would be a director's use permit. And then above 20,000 square feet would be a conditional use permit paralleling the existing type 3 approval process. So that's kind of the overview of it.
Okay, thanks. Would you like to summarize that?
Okay, hãy sau đó là có stacking nó là chỉ là hai nền đấy là Sunday đó, mỗi chi chủ tao này là mỗi cái của hai cái đó là có thành sai đấy kì, nếu như chủ tao ấy là sinh gì này kì sẽ tao hai cái này mỗi cái password phi đó, anh ấy sắm mỗi inject thành một auto cheap password phi một auto max like, anh ấy chỉ đi apply cho cheap password một outdoor, còn nếu ở lỡ qua stacking tao đi tới kia, bây giờ nếu họ dùng một tao nếu họ tại cái này mỗi cái oli cái chip hạ cái này cái mấy cho này là họ chỉ là để đó lấy cái này qua chọn đó họ cái con gì này cái này có xã hội có đa kỳ một cho nên mình có password cái này cái tao chỉ rồi cái cái tao họ like another permit for director use right for the 20,000 square feet. Yeah, yeah, the cầu một cho nên cầu password cái là chỉ có cầu họ đồ này là người direct use của nào rồi. Thì nếu chúng ta chỉ nên cho requirement cái chuyện cái nó cũng như họ cũng có tạo ra lời cho liên thực tế cho lên chùa nè, lên chùa có lúc chạy lên lời cái chuyện như phóng được phải cho bố chứ mà nếu mà chạy mua còn lớn. You know whether these stackings these becoming to affect.
If it is adopted as proposed, then whenever 30 days after it's adopted.
Okay. Vậy giờ để tới đầu như vậy là muốn cho license là muốn cho trai nó sâu cái một đôi còn có response là lúc vậy lúc đó thì là nó kệ tới đầu nếu mà sau chỉ bây giờ mua tàu license stacking đầu đi lúc thứ từng đó nè cái này một đôi cái này thọ nếu mà anh nói nên thọ với không phổ biến sự kinh nghiệm còn cái này chưa tàu thọ rồi thì cái phần bây giờ thì nếu mà nên gộp hạ cho sau là nó kệ nếu chúng ta mua với là hồi giờ planning commission là mua khỏi conditional use permit nó cũng hay nó đấy chiều nên lúc như thế phải báo mình như thế là phức tạp này cái bản thân không gì đây sao vậy
nhưng phải không đi về perspective là có mình để vào office để nó nghĩ đây là như
dạ lúc bóng cái hai bên mà nó sửa đối là sửa đối là licensing.
Okay, so we got the subject hopefully covered. Everybody understands?
I have a question.
Yes.
How come stacking can't be applied? Let's say you have 40 acres and you want 2 licenses. Why can't it be applied when you first start the application process? Why do you have to wait a whole year and then also do the whole, getting an environmental out there, doing biological testing, we're doing the one. Why can't it just be applied once if you know for sure?
So the question is if we are moving ahead with stacking, then will we still have this requirement that you start here and then you wait a year and go through another set of sequence and so forth to be able to stack beyond the 10,000 later? Is it written that if I'm new coming into this and I want to do multiple, I have to do this staggered approach? Or is it, I can do both at one time?
It is currently constructed that, the stacking permits would only be available to applicants who have already obtained a commercial cannabis cultivation permit. Well, that's certainly something that we could,
So new applicant can now request for stacking. They have to be the license issued active in order to request for stacking. Is that correct?
That is the way it's currently proposed, yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask one question before you do that? Just to clarify. So is it staggered every single year, or can somebody say year 1 they get licensed, year 2 they want 3 to make it go forward? It had to be throughout the whole years.
Is there a limit for the stacking license or how big?
Currently, there's no specific limit proposed to how many licenses could be stacked. It would just be a matter of the setback or buffer requirements. And then to your question, essentially, if it was as it currently proposed, if there was a new applicant coming in who knew that they wanted to expand to multiple licenses on one parcel, they could certainly submit an environmental document that proposed phase development or multiple licenses with, just applying for the first license, the first year, and then expanding beyond that in subsequent years if they were to receive the approval for stacking and if the program had capacity to allow them to do that. But yeah, to clarify, yes, currently it's only an option for existing program participants.
And Drew, can I just ask, was the thinking on that because we want to give the people who've already been in the program the first shot before potentially all the permits get used up by stacking? Or is it because we want them to have proven themselves before we allow it to expand? I'm not clear.
I would say that my thought is that it's pretty much just a carryover from the way the type 3 concept was laid out there, which was you needed to be previously in the program in order to upgrade your license type or have more than one, an expanded footprint.
Okay, one question, for the stacking, since there is no limitation at the moment, they have to be existing license. Now, is there a, acreage limit? Like the land? Not as close, right? As long as you have land, you can stack. Okay, so.
Yeah, I think it's really about the buffer zone and the mitigation. If all that can be done, then that's the only limitation.
Okay, so had the for stacking, not your license sure, the day you got license, có lấy đây là nó kia cái nó họ phải chia cái lợi chi cũng có một quả phải đây đâu có đại tế nữa nè thì chi nhá thì lý đây cái phải tương lai phải đại cổ hạt rồi phi lại phải mua cái phải mi họ buffer zone nó lớn là gì phải nhưng qua họ phải đây license gì đâu phải đại tế là tao nữa nè để cost stacking nữa nè okay thế còn một lúc nó để chi là chúng mình phải bằng như vậy.
The other thing to clarify in terms of like understanding whether there are restrictions to how much cultivation licenses could go on parcel. Bear in mind also that with something that is going to be, equivalent to or greater than 20,000 square feet, that would require an initial study mitigating negative declaration to be adopted by the Planning Commission. So part of the approval would be all of the environmental analysis that needs to be done, along with, getting that environmental document approved. So that's obviously a significant component in terms of whether or not practically you could stack, unlimited licenses. You would have to have an environmental document.
Above 20,000?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a quick question on that. So if you need an study mitigated negative, currently with a new application, you need secret documents to be reviewed prior to submitting the application. Where your study mitigated negative needs to be done prior to using the application for that document.
Well, that's a good question. I would say that if it is adopted as proposed, and we don't make any significant changes to what we propose, then those people would already be active in the program, so they would have an active cultivation license. So I think it probably would be a slightly different process in terms of the submission of the ISMND versus the current Appendix C process for new applicants. Does that clarify?
Okay, hopefully, yes, sir.
If stacking is in effect the limit of 500 permits, I think that defeats the limit or the purpose that they made the cap of 500. You're having multiple on certain properties. It's not affecting the concentration that's spread out through the county. So that cap should probably be lifted, or stacking should not affect the count that goes to the 500 permits.
So the comment is that in this view, the introduction of stacking should come along with an increase in the total number of allowed permits because it doesn't affect what we were trying to control in the IR. Drew, my understanding from when we talked about this before is that the EIR very specifically is bounded by the whether we do stacking or not do stacking, it's bounded by this 530. So it would have to be a whole new EIR to allow us to go beyond. Is that correct?
It wouldn't have to be a whole new EIR, but there would have to be some update, supplemental, something that was done to the EIR to incorporate the additional disturbance. And that's why, not to jump ahead, but that's why if you see in the fee section, we've modified the fees. The only way we modified the fees was to include an EIR update fee, knowing that, there is the potential in the future that, we'll reach program capacity. And if we want to explore expanding beyond the 530, then that's going to require some sort of supplemental to the EIR.
And to be clear, that's what allows their NBC documents to be not have licenses.
So that's and that's
And so to be clear, being within the assumptions of the EIR allows projects to use the environmental, the APC environmental checklist, so you wouldn't necessarily have to apply for an initial study and then D. So we would have to expand the assumptions in the supplemental or subsequent, depending on what the right document would be in order to expand the cap.
Okay, so sir, you had your hand.
He already, asked my question. Another questions I have is that, for stacking, could we stack the same license on top of each other? Like, for example, outdoor cultivation to 10,000 square foot, can we stack the same license on top of that?
So the question is, can we stack the exact same type?
Right.
Because our example was, well, you could do these different
Right,
types,
right.
but can we stack the same type, outdoor and outdoor? And the answer is yes. correct?
Yes, it would be a director's use permit for two 10,000 square foot outdoors, and then if you go above that, then it moves to a conditional use permit.
And, maybe as a separate partial next to each other, can we join that together and for the stacking on different partial without the permanent drill? I mean, put another drilling on the other partial for another license.
adjacent part, adjacent party?
Yeah, because, for example, if you own both partial, if you want to join those two partials together for the stacking, would that able to stacking, on another partial without putting another drill on the other property to qualify the permit?
Right, so to answer your question, as best as I can answer your question, is currently, if you had two parcels that were adjacent, then the second parcel, you can use your dwelling on the first parcel to meet the dwelling requirement on the second parcel. So that wouldn't be considered stacking. That would just be one license for each parcel.
Since we're not gonna have another 500 license available, will be fall within the 500 license. That if we gonna put another license, that will fall into the outside of the 500 license, right? Is that? Am I correct?
Either way, it would be an additional license.
Right, but the stacking is not, I'm talking about the cap of the 530 license existing. Will that, fall under, within the 530 licenses?
Would you stack?
Stacking,
Right,
yes.
for stacking,
If you're stacking, yes, it's an additional license would fall under the 530.
with
If
stacks the
you're
cap,
doing it on the adjacent parcel as well, it would fall under the 530.
but if that's already capped, then there's no way to stacking on existing license that fall on the other part.
Once you're at 530.
Oh, once you get to the 530.
Right,
yeah.
so once the limit cap, you want to stack in with your assistant license, you want to stack with another partial, because it's not gonna have enough property, not gonna have enough area in the same property, in the partial. It means that you have to jump into a different partial next to the partial, will that still be able to consider as a one partial if you do Jason?
So if I understand your question, the 530 is not related to parcels, it's related to licenses.
Okay.
Permits. Thank you. Yeah, and so, and just for clarification, we're currently at, give us the numbers of approved, issued, and
Yeah.
what, I'd like 260 between approved and,
I think we're 267, something like that,
Okay.
as approved, that have approved appendix Cs, and 243 maybe. I don't have it in front of me, but that's the best I can do off the top of my head.
and we're,
No, 243 is issued.
and so we are,
243 is issued, 267 is approved.
right. And we are projecting in our budget to be at 390 by the end of this fiscal year. So next June 30th, the projection is that we would have 390 active issued, which would still leave 140 to get to the 530. So,
Okay, so
yeah,
we
I think
still-
this gentleman had it. Missed it? Okay, Adrian.
Just wondering if there's gonna be a process for receiving these applications and helping them be distributed equitably amongst applicants.
Stacking specifically?
Yes, the stacked permits. That became an issue years back when the program was opened up after it had been closed down at one point.
Right.
And we all know what happened there. Another one is the IR presently restricts 1 acre per parcel, if I understand. So even through this process or any other, the most you can have on a single parcel is 1 acre.
And is this where we were talking about the individual study could expand beyond that?
Well,
We're not sure. We'd have
Oh,
to
okay.
I guess there is the potential that a standalone EIR could be done, but we haven't clarified that, so at this point, I would say, yes, I agree with you, Adrian, that, you know, again, we're sort of capped by the review of the environmental document in terms of how many licenses could be issued for one county.
And I would say through my conversations and our meetings with membership and such, that there was a strong desire to see one license issued per applicant, at least for the first year, to allow that equitable access.
Okay, so you're saying that for anyone that has an existing active permit, that they get a first shot at stacking permit before they're issued.
Well, I would like to say that, but that wasn't actually,
Okay,
I
what
would
did,
like to see something akin to that, but generally it would be that each applicant, each existing cultivator would have the access of one more stack license. One stack license, so that however many 120, 160 were left over could be, you know, utilized by as many different individuals as possible.
okay, so it's basically before we give multiple to one person, let everybody that
Yes,
has it ask, for- okay.
That was
Like
the
each license have an opportunity to staff. One first before one person got it like multiple.
that was the intent behind requiring.
Okay, is there something that we've got online that you want me to address?
Yeah, well, we got a couple questions.
我这个的那一刀刀，我看人家刀里面还被本它clarify 的，OK， 这么子那么，反正你一整天都飞了，俾咪俾手同俾刀刀出咗到咗俾你低嚟咗，也俾咗個眼刀咧，也俾晒咗rồi rồi ra nó so nó còn nó dễ phải chịu được rồi chúng nó phải nó OK。
Okay, we have something,
Yeah, did y'all cover this? Kind of covered it.
Question. Trying to understand what value of type 3 has.
Sorry, so can you ask what protections they are making?
Can you ask what projections they are making so one large corporation doesn't come in and monopolize on most permits by stacking? Hey, guys, if we can keep the conversation focused up here so we can all make sure we're moving along. So the question I think you did kind of already answer is that at least based on some input from the audience is if there was a process by which each applicant existing had the opportunity to apply for one before we were issuing multiple to another, that would address that concern. That's not how it's written right now specifically, or is it? How is it written? Or is it not address it?
Yeah, the only sort of requirement currently is that you have an existing cultivation license.
Okay, so it does not currently limit that you can only request one until everybody has a chance. Okay, so we.
So what if January and I decided I have a lot of lands down in the low flat and I decided to do 2 stacking down there, is that okay? Or no? Yeah, to like the stacking on top of permits inside. 2 permits. So if I wanted to do, I could put it, you know, I can request 2 stacking permits down in the low plan where I can have maybe like. No, I already have a license. Okay, but you know, I just wanna.
Yeah, so as it's written right now, it sounds like
It
you
is
could
okay.
say, I want to do 2, I can do 3,
As long as you
whatever.
have the land and you meet the buffer bound zone, then
Right.
okay,
And,
first shot.
and then, and I think that's what then was that's kind of in opposition to what I was hearing from Adrian about a concern that would happen and others would not yet, but you want to
Can
talk
I
about?
just clarify that? Okay, do hai tiền nếu mà anh lên tao ná, thì nó là chỉ tao mất tới chơi là một khâu là cho hai tiền. Để stack tao sẽ chỉ mua khâu đi, để chỉ cho nó giờ stack giờ là khi cho nó ý gì ná, để cũng mà anh lên tao ná, để cũng yêu đi cầu pass square feet là nhân nên cầu pass square feet gì đó cũng khó, để cầu pass đây còn tao nó chỉ chân nên cầu pass này chỉ có chuyện tao một họ em lỡ qua ý là gì của lỡ qua đó đợi nữa tôi sơn chỉ chuột có phải tế đua được phải chân là nó, thì cái một tao kia là nó là chúng ta mua hot xứ nó là cái em biết là thành là cái sự là tao. Okay.
May I offer a suggestion? May I offer a suggestion?
Sure.
So, it seems like there's a lot of questions, there's not that gonna be that many licenses, if we're at 280, double that, you're at 560 or over. So, you know, if those other people in the queue now that aren't approved, we might get to 400, so the concept of one for every might not work. So you might have to move to some kind of like lottery or something like that. Right, just throw that out there.
Yeah, clearly,
First come, first served.
clearly based on, you know, what we're hearing, there could be a concern that there is very quickly more demand than is available for what would be there if we had the stacking opportunity. So it's something I've noted over there that we can try to make sure that we comment on as we go forward. Yes, sir.
Another question is kind of related to the first question I've been asking. If I have another partial in different location, can I still use that as a stacking license instead of reapply for another applicants to the different partial?
So Drew, I think what we're saying is if I'm a property owner here and a property owner way over there, can that be stacking?
No.
That's a separate, yeah, okay.
That person would just need its own license,
Yeah,
and
we-
all the requirements that a
Right,
license, which
yeah.
is like a residence.
But not treated as a stacking.
Okay, just
Yes,
wanted
sir.
to
So
clarify.
stacking we're talking about now, license limit only refers to cultivation as in not like in nurseries or manufacturing or other businesses.
No, you're already allowed to stack that type.
I can stack up, even if you're filled up, I can still stack a nursery on my 10K permit. Maybe even
Depending, yeah.
530 is related to cultivation.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have one question, attached to his question. One person has 2 license or 3 license in different parcel. Like I own this parcel and another parcel far away, and can I apply for 2 license, different license?
Yeah, you can get permits on each property if they meet the requirements. It wouldn't be stacking, but you could get 2 permits.
Cái ý kiến của bên thực tế của công ty tổng.
Okay.
I think, right, you can own multiple license in different area of property as long as you can apply and you can be renewed and you can have 3 commercial licenses in 3 different areas.
Yeah, there's no restriction to how many properties you can own and have licenses on. This is related to how many licenses you can have per property.
But not just not consider as stacking.
Right.
Stacking mấy có đại cái gia đình nó chỉ gặp phải những nơi nó sẽ có chuẩn bị nó là chuỗi đàn gì mà chỗ đàn gì mà thì cái nhà stacking bây giờ có order đại lỡ là kề như đại share là đó có new different buffer zone different sequel different environment là chỉ có là order new nó có application đó có lẫn qua new require new sequel requirement đó là new land là nó yes Cầu tới cái là
So we've captured just under stacking, we had the question about, why do we require there to be an existing application? Couldn't we allow for someone to request 2 right up front? And then very quickly behind that was, well, wait a minute, we want everybody who has one first to be able to get stacking before others do. And we would like everybody to get a shot at 1 before multiple. And then we had the other, it was like, well, wait a minute. If I'm quick and I got the land and the money, can I do multiple right away? So it's clearly something that we need to address and be clear on how that's going to come forward. Is there?
3 licenses and those haven't really been used up, it seems like we allow more than 3 licenses. That wouldn't be an issue.
So the question is, if we're,
Applicant.
yeah, if we're quickly thinking that we're going to run out of the 530 because of all the stacking of 10,000s, would more type 3s help us accomplish the same thing? So Drew, do you want to take that?
I would say that in terms of the EIR, there's no significant difference.
But like, that you have to be a part from the beginning, you can't, and you don't stop.
Currently for type 3s, yeah, you can do a pre-existing license to the same as how we propose that.
But they're not, that, so you think that will ever be?
I believe that we have been at the cap of 15 in terms of applications. No, they haven't.
They're waiting for process for the planning commission.
Okay, got it, okay, well, maybe
the number of license for tech 3.
How we do, we have. Sorry.
What was your comment, Jen?
just lifting the cap and allowing new applicants.
To come in and apply as a type 3 for them to get it.
Yeah, so I've got that, the type 3, we're currently at the cap. Question, can we offer more? So it's something for the group to consider. Yes,
Well, I think that, maybe the county should consider have a number of limited, stacking instead of just limited. And just thinking about the future that it's no limited and there's gonna be like overstacking.
Stacking is only 550, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
the limitation that is in place is that we have a total of 530. So if we already have 260 some applied, that would by itself say then there could only be, if nothing else happened, there could only be 170 more stacked. So there is a limit by the total number. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, yes, ma'am.
An idea that a lot of other smaller municipalities use is for maybe those additionals instead of a lottery or like the pre-existing background for the number licensing and stuff. A lot of other jurisdictions will actually use kind of a grading system. And so they'll take in the applications for the block the larger license type. And then kind of get a grade, give a number score on each license based on how much they can farm the land use, how much the neighbors are supportive versus not supportive, and kind of give like a grading scale so that they're getting kind of the top performers instead of people who just.
Okay, so
Can I ask a question earlier about the type 3 license?
hold on just a minute, if you would. So for the people online, what I think I got was, rather than a lottery, which was one of the options considered, or other ways that we might limit is that we would implement some sort of grading system to rank the permit holders to determine who gets first up request. Okay, now type 3.
Yeah, because everybody says type 3 permits is only cap at 15, right? Is there a way that you guys, the county, or you guys looking to into the limits of that, like increase it, or that's just kept it?
So in the final EIR, it does give the potential ability to increase that cap from 15 to 50 licenses. But it doesn't really change ultimately the totality of what the program can utilize. Capacity.
So the type 3 is, the license type 3 is 20,000 square feet long, right? We're only 20,000 square feet.
Type 3 is up to 1 acre.
Oh, up to 1 acre.
So Drew, in that case, the question is, so you're saying that as a county, with the EIR that's in place, we could say we're gonna increase the cap from 15 to 30. But I'm gathering that would have been a reduction on the number of other kinds of licenses. So you're yes, you could allow more type 3s, but then that means you can have less 10,000 square foot.
Yeah, and Bella's comment, which you guys probably didn't hear, was that part of that equation in terms of, the people actually being able to utilize these licenses is that, as any of the type 3 license holders know, it's an exceptionally long process in terms of preparing the ISMD, getting it submitted, getting it to the planning commission, and it's circulated to the planning commission. It's a very long process. So in terms of utilizing those extra licenses to try and increase program capacity, it's a longer road to get a 1 acre than for additional individuals just get single licenses or 1 or 2 licenses.
The one extra license can be approved in-house, while type 3s have to go to the planning commission to have the environmental full environmental document beyond the appendix. How many 1 acre CUPs are currently pending that have applications submitted, and I don't have that, so there was that reserve period, right? Under reserve them, and everybody with the lowest, that 50 acres got to apply. I think the last one was just a process, so there's gotta be like another dozen to that 15. I say it's under, it's like around 9 maybe, for approximation.
But then they have to have how many agreements to apply up to, I think it was 50 or more.
Okay, yes, Adrian.
I actually love that idea. I think it's a really interesting idea to explore, and maybe I should ask you this question. Or does that grading process go with the development of the environmental document?
I believe it does with city standards. It works in like the aspect of DPIR, like they break the whole project down. Environmental, and then they bring in the different people, so like their fire chiefs get involved in the project, because they run fire outs. We would give it this score out of the whole loss, you actually get the best people for each department with the most knowledge and understanding of it, looking at their project and sitting one on one, and they know that.
I think that would be worth exploring.
Okay.
This methodology, so long as you can go through this process before you produce an environmental document.
Okay, so would you like to get some kind of guidance on how much support there is in various approaches here? So, I may need your help again, but I'm thinking what I heard is we have, let's see, a lottery. We have a grading system, a grade-based priority, I'll call it. And we have a first come, first serve.
Are we taking a poll on that?
Yes, you want to explain?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, I don't know how I start license again. Maybe I'll just say no, no, okay. Yeah, the each year they do salad. Có thể ở đây lên từ bỏ trong về chủ salad là chị chắc phải ở có thể ở chị này bỏ trong khó hay tiền nào ở lỡ cái grading system nó mà lỡ trong rồi cho chế có cho requirement tao một cái gì tình hình thì tao sức nữa nè có thể bé là chị what is it that one again? Yeah.
Grade based and first
Okay,
come.
có thể bé chị first come first serve chị lên từ số salad application chị lên từ số tao sức hay là bốc ký chị lại nữa.
Okay, so
Okay.
so we'll raise hands and are you ready to speak?
No,
Okay,
no one yet.
all right, so first we'll say, if you would like the lottery approach, where we basically just throw everybody's name in there and we start pulling lottery numbers, raise your hand.
No,
1, 2, 3, okay. If you like a grade-based priority, raise your hand. And if you want first come, first,
You got
that one,
three from
three,
here, yeah.
plus, okay, and first come, first serve is, okay, this is the brutal crowd. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, okay.
Sorry?
At least 18.
Hey, remember we.
Okay, so at least the, you know, the takeaway is, rather than take the chance or rely on this kind of a process that, hey, whoever gets there first and has all the right paperwork and.
Hey, Rick,
Yep, goes, yes, ma'am.
I would also like to poll if this was approved by the first of the year, how many people in this room would be interested in it?
Okay, so the question is, if this was approved by the end of the year, which we're trying to get something approved by the end of the year, and we have this first come, first serve ability for stacking is all part of the new ordinance, how many people in this room think that they would be quickly running to the department? Okay, so you got probably about a similar number, I would say.
Oh.
Okay. I'll let you capture that part. Okay, so we're now 7:40. Are you ready to move on from stacking?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, the next one I have is either overlay zones or self-processing.
Let's do self-processing.
Self-processing. Okay, do you want to talk about that?
So if I remember correctly, the comment came in as, that self-processing was removed. Adrian, that was one of yours, wasn't it?
Yeah, the period is breaking, it's just all across.
So the reason it was removed is that it seemed redundant. There's no state license type for processing the product that, you know, the flower that you grow on the farm. So it didn't seem that we needed to approve it because it's already built into the existing cultivation operations.
Can I expand on it? What you told me of it, it was intended to allow a single owner of multiple farms to process their material in singular space, not a commercial processing center. But it, for instance, when we get to stacking, The state requires separate buildings per license now. And so if you're able to get this permit, then the reduced rate essentially, the reduced intensity of use. Then you'd be able to, if you had two stack licenses right next to each other, you'd be able to get a self-processing permit to use a singular space without having to bifurcate.
Because otherwise you'd have to set up self-processing in both. Separate.
Yeah, okay, all right, which actually increases environmental impacts.
Yeah.
Assuming your processing facility presently is large enough to do that. You know, may not be.
So I'd have to look into the DCC regs, I think a bit more, but my understanding is that. For DCC, if you own multiple licenses, if you have the ability to move product that you cultivated between those licensed locations. So again, I think that's the reason that we remove self-processing, is that concept just doesn't align with the state's process.
Yeah,
But I follow what you're pointing out, so.
The intent of this ordinance was to do it at a non-commercial level, so it would be a reduced expense to the applicant, essentially. You're not going to be processing millions of other people's stuff, cars coming and going.
So then I think the issue there would be in terms of like the zoning restrictions or allowable zoning districts for processing. And I think that's probably where, you know, that concept would just need to be clarified, you know, where what's allowable zoning for multiple licenses or, you know, one owner who operates multiple licenses processing from all their farms at one location. So we could certainly consider including that idea and trying to align that with the state and clarify.
That would be great, just to look at it, especially when the situation is happening.
And you were a proponent of moving on to that one. Did you have something specific?
No, I just wanted to.
Okay, all right. So the clarification again for those online, if you couldn't hear, is if you had two different permitted locations, if this was in place, then you could process that on one of those two locations instead of having separate processing on each location.
But then you have to get a self-processing permit in order to process on one location.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying is, Adrian, you were pointing out, we used to have something that was taken out and you're saying if that would be back in, that's the reason you would like to see it there.
Yeah, we passed this as an ordinance at one point.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so point taken. Anything else on self-processing then? Okay, the next one up was overlay zones. Do you want to talk about that, Drew, from the slide? Give a walkthrough?
You didn't want to have to say that.
So the general sort of topic here is that currently opt-outs in Trinity County have were initially established, I believe, as urgency ordinances. And then later made it permanent. So in terms of my understanding of sort of what would be a traditional planning process is that a exclusionary zone would be established, and that would be an exclusionary overlay zone that captured all of the parcels that are currently in an opt-out. And so it's really just utilizing the more appropriate terminology and concept and establishing criteria to formally establish the opt-outs termed exclusionary zones and codified through zoning updates for all of those parcels basically would be rezoned under that overlay zone. So it might be able to give more.
And how zoning districts work, right? So they're.
They can't, yeah, they can't hear you.
So how it works is you have your general plan designation, under that you have your zoning districts, and then there's also in some circumstances in specific areas, overlay zones for specific development criteria. So we'll be utilizing that third option but it has to follow the full rezone process, and in this specific situation, there's specific criteria in order to apply. And it would be at cost to the applicant or applicants.
Or the exclusionary zone, those that.
Yes.
Not.
Well, and also,
Those apply.
there's also the like we always talk about opt-outs, but there was also requests that came about, well, what about if we want to opt in? So the overlay zone can go either way, but what it's saying is we will establish very clear criteria, because right now, there is not one. There have been multiple opt-outs that have been approved. They all follow somewhat the same process, but not a well-defined one. We have 5 or so in-house that all took very different approaches. So we're saying, what if we had a very consistent set of criteria that this can be done? And like other services that are provided by the county, it should be fee-based in some fashion, because there's a lot of work that goes into considering that, evaluating that, planning commission review, board review, all those sorts of things. So it's not free to the county. Should it be free to the people requesting it? Again, both for opting in or opting out, but changing that to kind of terminology. Is that fair? Okay. So yes, Dave.
What happens to the thing?
So the question is, what happens in this proposed approach to the existing? And I think you said those would become overlay zones as part of the process.
We need to figure out that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that that's something that, you know, needs to ultimately be decided, probably at the board level, in terms of how this ordinance wants to be adopted.
Legal and.
As to whether they want to convert the existing opt-outs into overlay zones or just leave the existing opt-outs in place, and I don't think staff currently has an opinion on that.
Yeah.
Agree.
I'll wait for you, she's thinking about it.
Okay.
Just don't want to lose my friends. On my thought.
Arteries to get over, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
However this process takes place, will there be an opportunity to revisit the overlay zones or whatever they're called for consistency with their existing findings? I think there's a lot of consistency in how they're implemented versus how the ordinances are written, and it has definitely caused a lot of grief and strife for people in those opt-outs.
And I agree, and on the implementation side, it's also extremely easy. In order to, because there's different, like different restrictions and the different opt-outs that we created for different reasons. And we'll have to formulate it internally and see what the best path is. But I think the most appropriate path would be to have them go through the rezone process and make sure they meet the criteria, but we'll see what.
I would agree with that, and I would advocate for that, because those original carve outs were not land use based. They did not go through an analysis that the subsequent ones might opt in or out. So you'd be, you know, treating them different. Right, and so and because there's so much inconsistency included in the carve outs, you want to be under one kind of regulatory framework.
Yeah, so the comment is that if we really want to get to consistency, then you would apply this whole next new set of criteria to that same process. I don't see a lot of people in the room that are looking real concerned about that, but I can pretty much guarantee you that online, there are some people that are basically saying, well, wait a minute, we went through this process, we gathered all these signatures, we got all this stuff, we got board approval, and now you're telling me we're gonna have to go through that process again and pay for it in a whole new way, and everything that we did before is worthless. And so I'm just telling you that I know it will be the other set of feedback, probably will tomorrow night. So, yes.
Just a side question to piggyback on all of that, because it was a big topic, since those original opt-outs were regional activities department. As part of Cannabis community, obviously, if anybody wants to chime in, I feel like it would be appropriate for those opt-outs to actually pay for it. So maybe we could bring some of that. It's critical here.
It's also important to set up a department for it to be able to function many decades in the future, and the way that the ordinance is right now, much like other ordinances in the county. It would be nice to re-adopt them so we have a clear record of why and where they were adopted, because even the mapping itself is confusing. We've just now built it into a GIS layer that'll help, but not new. Yeah.
Relative to the rezoning process, they will, whoever pulls this off, whoever ends up on the other side of this, they will have a cannabis exclusion zone and maintain all their other entitlements. They won't lose other entitlements relating to other forms of agriculture or other businesses that operate in there that may actually have the same impacts as a cannabis business.
So the concern is if this process goes into place, whether it reinstates these or new ones or whatever else, are we talking about specific to cannabis cultivation exclusion, or is that other types of farming or other businesses that could have impacts that people do not want to have?
Right, I can see once the findings were developed with cannabis, then it may have some unintended impacts.
Okay. Am I right that all of the existing opt-outs are in communities that we have now given direction to be covered with community plans in the general planning process? Yeah. The Weaverville, Trinity Center,
I think Rush Street's.
but Lewiston does,
Right. Yeah.
but that's, Weaverville has one. So anyway, I guess what the point I'm making is we're in the middle of the general plan, which is all about land use and zoning. And we have 8 community plans that will be developed. And I would be surprised if that doesn't cover that one area where we have several actually. Just one? Okay. All right. So anyway, good. We got the feedback here of things that we need to consider.
We've got
Anything else
some
on, oh, yes.
We had a couple on Zoom.
Perhaps with the historical opt-outs, could they be opt-ins by perhaps getting as many legal signatures and as much land ownership as was used to create them? So, coming from Rhoda, and I think that Rhoda does speak to the fact that this process, whatever it is, would establish the ability to opt in or opt out. And so if you meet the criteria, you can exclude or you can include. And so it goes both directions is the concept. Yes,
So
sir.
what would an opt-in look like? Because it would already be an available land use by zone.
Well, I think
So
it's-
what would the benefit?
It's probably primarily what Rhoda was referring to, which is if you are in an area that currently you can't, or by some other zoning that limits you from not being able to do it, could you get enough signatures to say, can we get the approval to do it? That's the idea.
That'd be great. I would have concern otherwise about like what entitlements somebody can get and opt in and otherwise conflict with people who are just an individual farm.
Yeah.
You know?
And part of this, and I know they've been digging into this a little bit, is you got to be careful how you draw this criteria. Is it 5 properties come together and that's a whole zone that's now created, or does it have to be X amount of minimum land? So this obviously will be one of the complicated and controversial issues that we address in this process. Okay, my next number is 7 with non-conforming uses. Mr. Lavani.
Sorry to break down my last thoughts.
Okay,
That's the topic.
I can sing and dance for a minute. It'll clear the room. Are you free?
Yeah, I'm
Funny.
You were.
Okay. All right, so the next one we're gonna do is non-conforming uses. Let me, while he's doing this, let me get a show of hands. How many of you are planning to stay until 9 if we're still talking? Yeah,
Here.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. What I want to do at some point, in fact, are you ready?
Whenever you are. Go for it.
Well, let me just ask this now, because it's the chance to modify our approach right. One of the things I want to do at the end, but we can do it right now, is to say, what do you think of this process for these public workshops? Because we're going to have 2 more. And we can do it the same way because we think this process works, or we can do it a different way. We just want to make the most of the time we have with the public for these workshops. So suggestions, yes.
I think you're doing a fantastic job facilitating, and I mean that genuinely.
Thank you.
I've seen this process work in other workshop settings with organizations, and it's really effective. And it's working.
Okay, thank you. Good. Yes, sir.
I agree with Damon.
Okay.
This works. What I don't know is, what where does this all get fit into the next strategy?
Okay, so that actually is also gonna be at the end, but we can cover some of that. When people have to leave, you'll know. So the next steps, besides my rough notes that we will be capturing and documenting, Bella and I'm sure others are over here taking more specific notes. That will both come back to the ad hoc committee, but at least to the extent we are capable of capturing the essence of it, we'll be sharing with the public. So we might, for instance, go into next meeting and just say, hey, we had a real robust discussion about this and we wanted to share with you what we got from this meeting and see, are you in line or are you different and that kind of thing. But then also give it back to the public, say, here's what we heard. And eventually, and here's what we decided to put forward before the planning commission and board. Because it's all input that we just want to consider. And then the other thing is we've at least talked about, we gotta have the bandwidth, but creating some frequently asked questions types documents. So like we have the questions about, can I use 2 adjacent properties to do such and such? Well, why don't we make that a question and an answer so that it's just out there and people can look at that and they don't have to worry about going to a public workshop because it's there. Anything else?
And the planning commission was with the planning commission first, but all they do is make recommendations to the board.
Yeah, the planning commission is pretty much the recommendation. So the board can choose to follow the recommendation of the planning commission or not. And that has happened in in a number of cases where the planning commission has said no, and the board said yes, or the other way around. Correct? Okay. So yeah, yes, ma'am.
I would just make one suggestion to consider doing them in reverse when we rebuild those first next time.
Okay.
Just for we're smaller numbers. Because because I feel like it's a little bit, it could be and then they'll get to see what we said at first, but we won't know what they said, they already we said. And this is working great here, there's a lot of consensus, so I don't know what it would look like there, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is not so much what we can do about this particular round, but in the future, when we do these things, especially if we're gonna do 2 in Weaverville, do 1 in Weaverville, then here, and then another one in Weaverville, so that there's, you kind of, this audience would know what the other audience had to say. I know it's a burden to put in 3 hours over and over again, but the other 2 that are scheduled in Weaverville will be in the board chambers, so we can be pretty confident that the internet and Zoom and everything will work. It has failed us on occasion, but not like it's doing here sometimes maybe. So those will be live. We will be able to participate, kind of like they are able to participate in those meetings. And just like in this meeting, we will share some outcomes, notes, indications of what we heard. And again, eventually that turns into what do we do about it? But I hear what you're saying. Even in kind of preparing for this, we thought, okay, this community is probably going to be more closely aligned in terms of what their views are. And in Weaverville, you're probably likely to get a much bigger mix. So this is my warm up for tomorrow. Yes.
So Weaverville getting 2, and they're an opt-out zone anyways, maybe there should be 2 in Hayfork, or maybe we're really Hayfork would be the best place. 2 in Hayfork, 1 in Weaverville, since they're an opt-out anyway.
So the suggestion was made, if we're doing 2 in Weaverville, can we do 2 here? And I will, turn to staff and my fellow board member is rubbing his forehead. But
Why do 2?
well, yeah, and so let me give you the background of this. We originally planned Hayfork and Weaverville. And then concern was raised that while there was no requirement for public notice, because this isn't a formal public hearing type thing, we didn't put it in the paper. We've tried a lot of other ways. I've sent out emails and posted on Facebook and everything else. But some people said, well, wait a minute, if you're not putting it in the paper, then people don't really have the chance to know. And I said, okay, well, we'll add one. And then we thought, well, let's add one where we know we have internet and we know we have big facilities and that kind of thing. I'm fine to come back. You guys fine to come back?
I would like to consider that. I think that would make it.
If you want us back, we'll come back.
Do it and Vivaville, and then that way we have better technology, and whoever is missing, they will go back, and then they can just come back.
Okay.
Go to Vivaville instead of posting not what.
We'll, I tell you what, we'll come back and poll and see if there's demand, we'll be here. We really want to make sure that we've got good balanced input to consider.
And we are gonna go to a different building because the internet is better in different buildings.
Oh, in the fairgrounds?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll get closer
In the
to that.
fairgrounds or in the
Yes,
community?
in the
In fairgrounds.
commercial building.
Okay.
The commercial building, yeah.
Okay.
Closer to the- Yep.
So, any other questions about kind of, well, I appreciate that you feel like this is working. That's great to hear. Yes,
If,
ma'am.
if the crowd is pretty small, then, the interview is probably. Oh, they don't know. Trading, I think. We can do that.
Okay. So again, the next steps, we will be summarizing, we'll hopefully do some frequently asked questions. And the comment cards that were there, you can send those anytime. The email address is cannabis.ordinance@trinitycounty.org. You can send any kind of comments specific to this and that will come to us.
And if you're in town and in the office during open hours, we'll have them on the desk as well.
Okay. And then again, as was highlighted when he was giving the overview, these public workshops lead to whatever then gets put together for planning commission, a whole nother opportunity for public input, and then finally to the board. And so we're really trying to engage. All right, so let's get back to process. Non-conforming uses.
So, just to briefly describe, non-conforming uses, it's a pretty well-established, process in terms of other ministerial permit approval. So to give an example, like a building permit, if there were significant changes to building code, and you had applied, say, at the end of 2023, there were going to be updates to California building code. If you applied for a building permit before the end of the calendar year, then the requirements for that permit would be good for that permit even after the building code is changed. So it's just kind of utilizing an existing standard within any other ministerial permit approval or with land use entitlements, where essentially once you've been approved, that site configuration is good to go into the future. So I don't know who the question was from specifically, or if there's other additional follow-up questions related to explaining that concept.
And before we take questions, do you want to do any?
For the non-conforming usage, lý lịch là chế nó dọn, chế là đi hay kia tàu cá cho nó thành một cái là chế lên nó xuất ra nó như cho thằng thì ra là chế cho thế này tức apply tao đi đại của nó building permit là nó chế lỡ trời ơi thằng đến lâu là nó đi chừng chừng tao học tú đi chừng kind of like grandfather and even though they're adapting new one nó này lần lúc chia là nó là nên chừng chỉ tao biết họ em cũng vì nó bao giờ nên cứ apply cái là cứ proof cho nên là nó nè giờ phần đấy như thôi giờ là vừa thôi trong mình
We happen to have a barn on the building that we bought that is 45 years old, and the upstairs has only had studs the whole time. And when the building inspector came out for something else, he said, if you let that fall, everything has to be by permit. If you don't let it fall, you can do anything you want to it. So it's a good example of, we get to do something that otherwise never would be approved today. But trying to save an old building that has a lot of character. Okay, so did somebody have some specific things that they want to ask about this or concerns, or are you, oh, yes.
I have like a question. So like, let's say someone wants to add something like a self-transport to their fecal dock or appendix, and they're not conforming, they're pre-existing, whatever, they're not conforming. Does adding something like a self-transport to fecal dock move you out of non-conforming? Like where's the line? Like if you have a non-conforming house, you put some siding on it, you have to bring the whole building. Right, where's the line? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
Thank you.
And Carla, specifically, you're adding, could you add what?
So my example is like, if you want to add a self-transport.
Self-transport things.
We had criteria, I had to go to the specific zone, but that was, like a substantial deviation.
Yeah, like what constitutes, what, where
Like
is
the
the
financial would better.
or what is?
So we tried to rely on some of the other existing code sections, so some of the language that we ended up utilizing was from the modification section of use permits. And so I believe where we landed was a substantive change to the nature of the project. So to your question, Carla, perhaps we need to define that more clearly. But that I believe is the right thing we have to.
Well, that does give us something that.
Substantive change.
To the nature of the
The
project.
nature of the project.
An increase of the intensity or substantial change in the location of the area used for cannabis activities. A change to the previously approved site configuration that results in a substantive change to the approved site-specific environmental document for the project. But the intent here is that you don't, we would need to re-review or reanalyze if there is a substantial change under. Yeah, that's really what.
And then, okay.
And in case for anyone listening, that's on page 8.
Okay, so page 8 of the document is what we're referring to, and I think you probably heard Carla's question, but really wondering, what are some things that you could do and not jeopardize this continuation of non-conforming use? The specific example was adding self-transport. The answer was, well, we have to look specifically, but it talks about substantive change that affects mainly CEQA-related impact. And sounds like something we're gonna have to dig in a little bit more to make sure we're clear. As it stands, Drew, would that be a director's use decision? It's not gonna come above that unless there was some appeal to it, right?
Right, it would be a discretionary decision ultimately. I would think though, just to try and generally answer your question, Carla, since most cultivation licenses in their environmental document have scoped in transportation from distros coming to the farm to pick up product. If the impact could be offset by doing self-transport, as long as they had fully scoped in, you know, as long as they weren't expanding beyond the assumption or what was analyzed.
Okay, any other questions about this? Okay. That was number 7. Another number 7 was cottage permits. 5,000 square feet. So, you want to talk about that, Drew?
Sure, so I didn't dig into it, but my recollection is that the cottage permit that you're referring to is 2,500 square feet or less. And my understanding is that it's still something that requires a DCC license. The only thing that you don't have to do is that it doesn't require the same water board enrollment as a larger license. So it is a little bit less, but in the grand scheme of what you're required to do, not significant.
So it's only 2,500.
It's only 2,500, and the only difference is that I think it's if you're on a particular slope or lower, then you aren't required to do water board enrollment under the state general order. So, but you still need to do an appendix C document, you still need a county permit, you still need a state license.
Still required to have a standard.
Yes. Yeah, so it's not water board.
Don't you have another square footage of 5,000 as well? Like 25,000 license and.
What he's talking about with the lesser requirements is the 2,500 or less. Right?
I think it's the state water board act in discrepancy with state licenses actually calls it 2,000.
2,000, okay.
So there's no 5,000 like.
Okay.
There is a 5,000 license, right? What is classified as a?
Type 1 special.
Type 1 specialty, yeah, that 5,000 and. Type 1 specialty, yeah.
So there is a 5,000 called type 1 specialty, and then there's this lesser restricted 22,000 or 2,500. Okay.
Yeah,
Did anybody else?
The reason that I bring this up for discussion is that because I see that there are many people that they they are hoping, I heard the talk that they are hoping that is, can be able, still be able to cultivate under the Prop 215. So I think that they're gonna working more because the Prop 215 has in the plan the sunset. So even working more, but people still, I heard they found that they still hope to be able to do that. But ask the county to allow them to do that. I heard that. So I think that what I heard the cottage license, I don't know, that's why I don't know the exactly what it is. But if it is true, as I heard, that is a there's no heavy regulation for the license type, and no need to go to the state. Like what I heard, it'll be a way for the county to adopt and regulation that is not as heavy as legalizing, so that we can draw people to the license type.
Is there, I'm just thinking, it sounds like it'd be good for him to get some follow-up details on this. Just get his email address and then,
I've got it pulled up.
okay, go ahead.
So in 1743, our existing ordinance in the application section for the 1743.02 application, subsection B, it says any licensing except for specialty cottage outdoor that qualifies under 2,000 square feet of cultivation area and less than 5% slope provided under this chapter will require enrollment as dictated by the water, by the water bill. So essentially what that's saying is that for licenses, all licenses except for specialty cottage outdoor on sites that are less than 5% slope, they are not required to do water board enrollment. So that is the only lesser requirement that exists for that specialty cottage outdoor.
2,500 square feet.
Or 2,000. Okay.
2,000 if you want to not enroll in the water board.
Oh, I see. The 2,000 is the not enrolled. Okay. So I think if you would like even more details, if you could get your email address, we can follow up and have a conversation.
Actually, I don't, I'm not interested about the license type, but I asked this question. That it might benefit the whole community.
Can I explain? I think he just bringing these questions up because we need to clarify. There's other communities, there's other farmers in our community that is interested in the commercial cannabis, but doesn't have the resource to get to the 10,000 square feet. So they was trying to see if any other way that they can get themselves into as little as this cottage, 2,500 square feet, or the type 1 specialty. And, just like what are the requirements coming into play if they were to apply into those, and do they have to do the same thing as apply for the 10,000, then minus to the 10,000, because if there's no difference in. So the only difference, though, let me just clarify this, the only difference, though, a cottage, the type 1 specialty, a Jeep had a lot of data, teach the water board, so they thought everything else, that every sequel low, the fish wildlife low, everything, the only teach the water boards now. A side idea, so what a couple has with being element.
ขอบคุณน้องมาอยู่แต่เป็นมือเดียวถึงว่าก็ต้องอยากจะที่นี่จะเป็นเราสาแต่ที่เชื่อแต่เราสาที่เขาอยู่ในเก่าว่าเราต้องจะเอาวัวคนใดนี่แหละเราต้องตัวร้อนมาอย่างคือน้องที่พักตัวที่นี่แต่เราต้องวัวนี่แหละในโอเคก็คือเราเรียนรู้หมดเสียที่เรียนหมดเลย
Yeah.
Okay. I tried to capture that by, just kind of saying that there's interest by property owners who would like to cultivate with basically lower barriers.
Exactly.
Okay, did anybody have anything else about that subject, the cottage? No, okay. I see type 3 versus stacking. Did we already address that when we did stacking and type 3 came up? Does anybody have anything else?
Yeah.
We're
I
good?
have a quick question on that.
Yes, sir.
If you already have a type 3. That's a county license. Type 3. Acre license. If you wanna do some other type, let's say it's an outdoor license too, right? It's not a mixed light license, not an indoor license. Can you stack other license types in that acre?
Within that acre?
Within that acre allotment?
Is it in your environmental document?
What is, what?
Those additional licenses? But that would probably cover that.
But so you're saying a type 3 that is an outdoor type 3,
Right.
okay, and can you do other kinds like mixed light and other
Yeah.
things within the same space?
Yeah.
And you're saying if your secret documents say so?
So you can do a supplement to your.
So the question, if you're asking about your specific project, Jeff, or you're asking that. and
I think it applies to people that wanna mix it up in their tent as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, my general thinking is that if you're staying within your approved footprint and going less than, it wouldn't be a problem in terms of like, you know, if you already have an approved environmental document, you'd likely have to go through the modification process. Just to capture the additional license types and then to see essentially where it lands in terms of, is it substantial change to the nature of the project? Are you creating significant more trips, traffic and impacts? Or is it less than the total impacts of the project?
Then my question would be, and this also applies to like a 10K. If the 10K, say outdoor. Let's say 10K mixed light, because you can still do outdoor and mixed light, right? Or,
Let me clarify that. State change the definition of mixed light.
I'm talking a two,
Oh, here too.
but like a real mixed light. If you got a 10K tier 2. If you wanna do some other things in there, do I have to buy multiple county permits now?
So if you're talking about an existing 10K mixed light and wanted to go to 5,000 outdoor, 5,000 tier 2 mixed light,
And or maybe, yeah, but like maybe I want a 500 indoor too.
it would likely land.
Maybe I want 500 indoor.
Okay, that would be an increase in intensity. So, but ultimately, that's gonna be a change to the environmental document unless it's already been proposed in that fashion.
So that would be the appendix C from the 10K.
Correct.
And is any of this changing in what we're proposing, or are you just referring to the way it is today, we're not proposing to change?
I mean, I think what Jeff's asking is about clarification of stacking with less than, you know, within an existing approved footprint. So, you know, could we have, however many 500 square foot indoors instead of
10
10,000.
500 square foot indoor, do I have to buy 10 500 square foot indoor licenses?
That is currently the way.
Or should be permit?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, permits, you would have to for that, but if you had 10,000 square feet of a permit. Could that, you could have 2 state licenses, one being a 500 square foot. 5,000 square foot outdoor and 5,000 square foot mixed light. If that's what you want.
So to sort of agree with you and answer your question, Jeff, yes, you could have multiple smaller license types that fit within the existing approved canopy square footage.
Now, is that still stacking? So now I'm gonna hold 20 county permits.
What he's saying with the indoor would be stacking, but if you have one permit, one 10,000 square foot permit with the county, but 2 state licenses for the 10,000 square foot permit with that.
Well, I think that where we would land is 2 licenses, 2 permits with the county. So you switch from a 10,000 square foot mixed light permit with the county to the same as the national, which is state of 5,000 square foot outdoor and 5,000 square foot. So you'd be changing your, it would change your license type and capture the actual license.
So you have to get 2 county permits with the same square foot.
Correct. Same as you would have to get 2 DCC licenses for the same. But there's no limit on stacking. But there's a limit.
It's not available.
Well, there's a total program capacity, but there's no limit on.
Right.
What you can stack on a parcel in
Right.
terms of what we currently.
So is this for ML2 because or when did maybe this change? Apparently, what you're saying, I thought on our county permits, you can do. It's like an after, they don't care if you. Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that you could do, basically you can pull, you can do depth on that. Currently, right? I would say as long as you don't have. Are you saying that that's gonna change? No, that's gonna stay the same. It's only for ML2s windows. Because right now, it's the way our county permit works. You can do outdoor and you can do depth on the same. One permit.
Are you saying you can have 2 state licenses?
Some people do. Some people do. They have 2 state licenses.
So that's one of
and
the.
1 county permit.
That's one of the current inconsistencies with Trinity County regs and state regs. So what we're proposing would be that if you want to have 2 state licenses, that 5,000 and a 5,000, that we would consider that stacking, and you would need to basically get a 5,000, a 5,000.
Well, let me say this, here, that could be a problem because right now, then your state just changed outdoor and ML1 at the state are now 1 license. And that now aligns.
The state will allow, just like our ordinance currently allows, which was some foresight on Keith's part that I never anticipated. You can do light depth on an outdoor license. The state now allows you to do light depth on an outdoor license. But fixed light is up to 6 watts. So you can't do an ML1 in an outdoor without.
So I'm using the wrong word, not ML1, light depth. So will we still be able to light depth on an outdoor as 1 permit, or are we gonna have to stack to be able to light depth in our outdoor? Because right now, we only need 1 permit.
So let me clarify that, like, you can pull tarp and do light deprivation on outdoor cultivation. That is a DCC rule change that happened last year.
Yeah.
A mixed light, that is not the same as outdoor, and that is not the same as pulling tarp.
Okay.
Mixed light means that you're using supplemental lighting over the mature canopy during flower.
Okay, yeah, that's not what I meant. I meant light depth, sorry.
So if you want to convert out a 10,000 square foot outdoor license and have 5,000 square foot of outdoor and 5,000 square foot of mixed light, that would be 2 county permits.
Thank you.
So.
Yes, no worries.
But one of those clear as mud by the time you get so far into the details, but.
Yeah.
But I captured just before we go into other questions about it, so. I was kind of hearing what officers have approved permit for X amount of space, and I multiple things out there. And the answer I heard was, well, it could require secret and mitigation changes because what you're going to do instead of what was originally contemplated might require that. And then Drew kind of acknowledged that with maybe a misstated initially version of what Carla was saying is we do have some between the way the state and the county looks at some of this. And if you were making some changes, it could require it to be stacking. But in Carla's specific example, is that, I get that right?
Yeah, I agree. And just to clarify, I mean, alternative could be that where we currently have a 10,000 square foot outdoor or a 10,000 square foot mixed light license in Trinity County. It could be that there's a 10,000 square foot outdoor or mixed light where essentially you're getting the approval for that total canopy space. And then you're able to fall in underneath that total canopy with additional approvals that don't require a permit from Trinity County, but require standalone licenses for DCC. So that's something we could incorporate, but we've tried to go the more straightforward route.
Hey, Jeff, I think
That's kind of a loop to why can't we just get a 10,000 square foot cultivation like permit? Just kind of blankets everything inside of that. why do I have multiple permits from the county for multiple indoors when I could just from C get a 2,500 square foot indoor?
In terms of the indoors, it has more to do with that. And that the license, the 500 square foot indoor license type is the only one that is PIR.
But I know we're not to the fees yet. I'm paying for a new goddamn EIR. I want everything.
Well, then, I guess you'll be stoked that PIR updated.
If I'm forced to pay for it, I want it to get.
And that would be one of the functions, agreed, when we were in the process of doing the supplemental, to the EIR, your comments would be, taken into that.
On the flip side of that. I want floodgates. I want to pay for the EIR. You know what I'm saying? I already paid for the general plan 6 times, 7 times. I don't want to pay for the EIR. I think everybody after 5:30 should pay for the EIR. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. I've been waiting all night.
I agree.
Nobody.
Adrian.
Just on the idea of this internal stacking sort of thing is what I've always called it, where you have a 10,000 square foot one, you can do everything you want in there. So long as it's including an environmental document, surrounding counties don't, in all the ways that we don't follow the state regs, they also don't, like in Humboldt County, when they began, people had, say, 17,000 square feet of cultivation. And so the county gave them one permit for 17,000 square feet. And so they don't tie their permits to the state size restriction, but they still make you get the state permits to accommodate for that. So there is, precedence out there and whatnot, and just a consideration as far as the environmental review goes, likely you do the environmental review, just to even prove you're not having further impacts. But it cannot be seen as piecemealing because this was not available regulation at the time of the appendix 6.
Explain that to me.
Piecemealing under CEQA, where you are supposed to apply for the totality of the project and all the foreseeable other projects we entail in there. But if it is not a regulatory option for you to do that at the time of the appendix C, then it can't be seen as piecemealing.
So a new option becomes available, you should be able to take advantage of that option without adjusting your.
No, you would still need to do the environmental review, but technically, somebody might step up and say, hey, you're piecemeal, you should have applied for all of that at once. But
Oh, I got you.
that wasn't even the option.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. All right, thank you. I just needed to understand. And yes, ma'am.
So, I want to go back to the 2,500. Something comes to my vision. I want to ask for the new applicant, for the 2,500. They need to have a house, and they need to have a septic. They have to have all of that.
It's a requirement, yeah, go, that's it, it's the only thing to want is water, that's it. That's the right term. Yeah, 2009, yeah, the only thing, that what you chose, that apply how water, what's that, everything requires the same thing. Yeah.
And there's nothing in the proposed ordinance to get rid of the requirement for residents.
There is nothing proposed, maybe we want to poll the crowd on that topic.
Is there a way that, thing change for people who apply for like 2,000 or under 2,500? They don't require a house or something because it comes out in the people that they can afford to build a house, they can afford to do something.
Well, so the question is, again, maybe specifically for these, 2,000 and under, which have this, at least in the water board requirement, could that be a reason, that excludes the requirement for residents?
Well, the cottage industry 2,000 square foot is tied to a home business. So it's kind of a home requirement there. And then, like, Drew just brought up, most of those are tied also requires CUP. So they're even more restricted than like that.
And the true concern would be coming up with the appropriate mechanism for waste disposal, because there will be people there.
So I don't know.
County environmental requires for like a something for the sewer disposal? Or is that not part of those?
The zoning requirement met that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so for the people that are either on the other side of the room or online, I think this whole thing about the residents being required. I know I've been in discussions where part of that came back to, by requiring the residents, you knew that there was a place for people to be housed safely, for solid waste to be managed appropriately, for clean water to be available, all those sorts of things. And so even if there was not a requirement for residents, there would be a requirement for all those things. And so it gets to be kind of messy, and that's why we didn't touch that. Okay, the next one that I have on the list is either micro business definitions or fees. Micro business, I heard twice. Okay.
I want one.
Okay, so what, go ahead, Drew.
Did we skip over manufacturing limitations?
It had 0.
Oh,
That's-
I thought it was
that's-
6.
No,
But
that's 0.
it was a 1 online.
Oh, yeah, 1 plus 0. Sorry.
Adrian, one of the voting for it without a vote.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Uh, so micro business was next. Do you want to give any frame of reference of how this? Does the new ordinance address changes to that group?
I believe off the top of my head, the only change to micro business, is the removal of the, product limitations.
And we added in, you didn't just have, because you had to have a cultivation license. State. Now you can pick and choose like state license. And I also removed the confusing, there was a few confusing and repetitive qualifiers for the direct.
Figuring out a way to tie the manufacturing question to this. So if you've got a micro business license and part of it's manufacturing, will you still be required to utilize 75% of Trinity County product?
As proposed, no.
Right, and we've removed that from 1743 F4C.
So this isn't a draft document that I haven't seen, and I said it's a draft ordinance that was circulated that I don't know that I've seen, so I apologize for asking them questions.
Page 36.
Now, the micro business doesn't have to be storefront, it can be at our physical location where the fund. Or have to be a storefront.
Micro business and storefront are totally separate.
It can be on the phone.
Question, think about that, the state requires you to have a license that's created through statute to qualify for the micro business. I don't believe that retail delivery only actually qualifies. Because that was created through regulation.
And one of the things that Bella was referencing is that, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, they've created the ability for micro business to actually create vertical integration. So we have included the ability for storefront retail to be associated with micro business. Now, the allowable zoning districts for that remain the same from the current ordinance.
Yes.
So wait a second, I'm just. One micro business. They now storefront still. Stores.
Maybe it was self-distribution.
So just 2 points of clarity, go back to that. So we have firmly removed the limitation to allow for a distribution of more than micro business license to distribute in a limited amount of third-party product. Sure to get down the road. Because the current language again is over the last year. Actually had this own language from 6 years ago when it was drafted, saying that the micro business distributor component was limited to only 500 pounds of third-party product, separate and apart from our own, which is out of line with the state micro business license. The state micro business license and the micro distribution component that have allowance. So given the fact that we're about to have 390 cultivators here with only maybe ourselves and a couple of active distributors, it kind of seemed to continue to put that language and to allow us to be in line with the state's language to allow us to, if we want to distribute as much product as we can, for Trinity County cultivators to get it out. California, is that language being addressed? Is that what's been removed?
That language has not been removed, but I appreciate the comment. I think that's a great.
Okay. Second point of clarity, going back to technicality of having that manufacturing component on the micro business license, we were thinking of type 6. The state is the county now officially in a position to approve fire permits.
Yes. We're waiting for the first one.
I know, I'm late. Yeah, we got 9 days, I'll be there to do it.
Ask for hands raised for who is the county line right now.
We sent some folks off to training so we could do that, evaluation. Yes,
I got a question on the people, these guys on finance getting there, so definition. Believe in manufacturing, micro business, explain to me because I'm not as familiar with you guys, what constitutes a micro business? What's the definition of a micro business? Is it a dollar amount? Is it type of- it's really like.
3 license types. So the way it's currently constructed is you have to have a cultivation and you can have, depending on what your zone, you could have distribution, manufacturing, processing. It's not so sure. Non-storefront retail. So it's basically.
You are limited to only 10,000 square feet of cannabis, so I think we can capture it out. That license and campus.
And it also it counts the gross revenue. There's 3 tiers for it, and once you grow, you go up to 3 tier.
any other questions or concerns about the micro business? Yes.
So. When the micro business ordinance was originally passed, there was, I don't remember, can you know how many are? Or is it a minimum acre? Other types of licenses. Why don't have it? Because like, I'm just using myself as an example, this is a huge problem for me, because I'm on less than 5 acres, an RR overlay. And I can't produce bubble hash, which is mechanical ice water extraction, no walls, anything. I can't like distro or nursery. I can't sell my seeds, which come out of the same plant. There's no other impact increase to intensity or anything like that. It's allowing me to like vertically integrate and have tracking points to my same business. I can't do that right now because of the limitations on my parcel size, I think. I don't have. Well, I know I can't do manufacture, I know I can't do bubble hash on my parcel.
You can't do nursery.
And I can't do nursery, and those are really important for me in my business. They like, I cut my value way down, and I can't sell my seeds. And that I can't wash my own flowers with ice water. Those are really big value added components that don't have any effect on like the impacts of my operation whatsoever. And so I'd like to be able to like do those things and self-destroy like own thing, which is a little different than what he's asking about. Can I bring anybody else's flower and process it on the but I'm on a small parcel, but I'd really like to know if there's a way to rectify that it aligns to the impacts. And these license types are separated out by the state, but it has nothing to do with the way I'm using my land. It's just what I can sell. And I'm on the county road. So can you get all of the licenses? I think so. I don't think there's anything on the state that would prohibit it.
Okay. So for the benefit of others, Carla, what I've got is the question is why is there these special limits on rural residential or the special size
Or
property
acreage.
or acreage?
Because I think nursery, it was like a 5 acre minimum or something like that. Nursery is the biggest. I can't remember anymore.
But specifically, if there,
Maybe it said it has to be on ag or.
if there's no environmental impact to doing these other things.
Yeah, and manufacturing to the bubble hash specific.
Right, okay. So is this just something we need to take back and do some more research on to see if it's something that we can work with? Okay.
Yeah, Exactly, I just wanna, I have to have the nursery license for you guys,
I've gotten multiple questions like that.
but I don't wanna increase my canopy, I just wanna give them some seats.
Okay,
There's
so we've got that question. Yes,
people like what she's saying.
people like that. Oh, okay. You have fans online. Yes.
I wanted to highlight the necessity for self-distribution in a micro business in RR also. It's going to be
Yes.
contemplated, that I think that self-distribution also should be
Yeah, you
contemplated.
guys are just killing me, man.
Yeah, without, yeah.
But you could save me.
It's essentially necessary to have the self-distro, not only so you can get your product out, but also if you have 3 license types on your property, you need that self-distribution license to move between those license
Yeah,
types.
you can't even take it to yourself on the
Yeah.
same person. So.
Okay.
It's the fun way the state wrote the laws, but. for
Okay.
functionality-
Was it, yes,
Question, I know the state does not prohibit this, but at the county level, does the county level prohibit in any way, shape, or form forming joint ventures with other licensed cultivators? For instance, we have the facility, we have the nursery, we have the manufacturer. We're not utilizing any and all of our space. Can we consider working with other professionals underneath the guise of our hood and standard operating procedures?
You could look for
The
shared,
business transactions.
you could go with the shared type S. You could buy for the shared type. And then anybody who works under you, quote unquote, would like rent time or pay like a membership fee. I think it's like $500 or $100 for that type S for the operator. Like the individual people who would operate under you, and you just come in, the only caveat is you can't have 2 shared use space workers at the exact same time. So you'd have to say like, okay, here's our distro spot, and you could rent it for Carla, who would go get her shared use type under you. And then she would just come to you and say, hey, we have it from this slot to this slot. And
Then my only question, I think maybe point more to Ms. Bella. In a situation like that where we have a conditional use permit that addresses the amount of traffic, we actually have it set up so that nobody's really coming to our property. Other than, 6 employees or something like that, we've already counted the cars. If we were to stay within those guises, do you believe that it would trigger any of that needing to be addressed environmental level that we're actually doing a type X?
I don't think, we can't give you a clear determination presently in this meeting, but generally, yes, if you're staying at less than what was approved in your environmental document, that it should qualify as a minor modification. Cool. All right, thank you.
and this type S is something that has been kicked around as an economic development idea about basically using a facility where people could come together and use a space that's set up for that kind of stuff. But it takes a lot of work to get there, and what I hear is that would be a nice option, but I'd also just like to be able to do this right here.
I think both are really good options.
Yeah. Okay.
And type S is included in the ordinance update.
And it's just gonna mimic the state fee, I think. Oh, so.
Okay. I have definitions and fees. Fees. Okay. Yes, Carla's ready to talk about fees. Oh, sorry, Rick, just one second. Okay, go ahead.
Specialty type 1 is like disproportionately expensive compared to everything else. And I'm wondering if that can be invested, because I could stack 2,500 to save myself half of my fee every year. Of course, I could just get past that. So the specialty type 1, 5,000 square foot, $3,000 is like really disproportionately high. I would love to have that.
Is that anything that we were addressing already? No. Okay.
Part of the reason I'm partly not moving.
Is there any sort of a summary that you guys want to provide about the fees changes? Is it really the big thing I'm seeing is the difference between general plan and EIR update? And instead of funneling money to the general plan, which is now pretty much paid for, if you will. We know that we're going to need a new EIR before too long, is starting to fund the money there. But otherwise, we weren't changing fees as it's proposed.
We added $75 general plan update fees.
Oh, to mirror
Others.
what others do. Okay, so instead of 1,000, 75, and then the EIR was going to be what? How much?
This in fact is proposed at basically the same level that the previous general plan update fee for the license type would propose that, so.
And the last EIR cost how much? You know? 400? That's a drop in the bucket compared to the 3 million for a general plan. Okay, I'm behind you first, Jeff.
Okay, so, Bella, what you just said, $75 fee for general plan. Other people come into the planning have to pay that for their project as well. Or do they have to pay $1,000?
No, it's been 75 and 50 since the last adoption.
And $1,000.
Only for
1,000.
cannabis.
Only for cannabis, right? All right, I don't want to pay $75. I think we should eliminate that. We've paid more than our fair share. I also think if there's going to be a new EIR, then moving forward above, say, license 530, they need to pay for it.
We paid 13 times.
I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to pay for the EIR, so somebody else can buy a indoor license. You know, I don't want to pay it. I don't, do we really need it? Is it 100% a fact that it's gonna happen? That we're gonna have to pay for it in the EIR?
It's not a new EIR, but there, my opinion is that yes, there does need to be some update to it. We want the program to be able to organic grow beyond where we're currently at in terms of the restrictions or limitations that are presented to the EIR.
Which are those restrictions for what, 5 years?
Essentially based on that 5 years.
Again, not my problem. If you want to stack a license over 530, pay for it. I don't want to pay for it.
Noted.
So the comments that I've got, first part was about specialty type 1 being disproportionately high. And then with these EIR GP fees, a suggestion that be paid for by the new folks. And that maybe an interpretation of what I heard, credit the people who've been paying for a long time, a general plan fund. So if I've already paid $1,000, then skip me an X number of times until I'm equal back up to $1,000 or something like that.
Yeah,
Is that
$6,000 or $6,000
or 6,000 or whatever? Adrian,
Second on to what Jeff said, I would even be generous enough to pay that $75 one more year. But with building permits, you're paid it once. You don't pay it again. So yeah, I've been paying $1,000. So I think the first year was actually prorated 500 since 2016. I don't want to pay more than the general plan. And the EIR fee, I generally agree. I mean, if there was substantial reason why existing cultivators would benefit beyond the possibility of the staff, I would be more inclined to support the EIR fee. But again, if it's going to be for people coming into the program who haven't contributed to any of the development of the ordinances to the thousands and thousands to the general plan, then basically I'm opposed to it too. Also, if there was some critical element that I'm unaware of, that would put program in jeopardy, it's to it anyway. It would be an interest, but as overall, it may be something that would come up in the future. It would probably require, I believe, it would require polling existing cultivators to find value in it. And again, if it's going to be done, if it's going to be done for new permits or for increased cultivation on a single parcel, it seems that it seems like it should be a new space, because there are people who aren't qualified for it. There are people who you know, whether you want it or not, because that doesn't really matter in this sort of conversation, but the people who wouldn't qualify for it, so we shouldn't be able to, we shouldn't be required to pay for it. And it would also, considering how long the process would
I
take,
see,
it would take like a year at least to gather the funds to even begin the process. So I would imagine we'd be seeing returns on it in no less than, or no less than 2 years, more like 3. So I would rather stay the course and let people get back on their feet, have this opportunity for stacking that exists now, and consider opening it up in the future. But
I missed a piece right in there about 2 or 3 years.
oh, the duration, it would take at least a year to collect the programmatic fees.
Oh, okay.
And then another year and 2 years to create the document, and then there's gonna be the rulemaking process, so it's gonna be 3 years out. And so would I then be paying $1,000 a year for 3 more years? So now we accumulated this huge pot of money. We may find that there's not even a desire to do it, you know, and again, reinforcing the fact that if we're paying that number, then we all have access to stacking. Or at least a very, very, very high proportion of the setbacks.
Gotcha. Okay. And I mean, if nothing else, I mean, if we can do the math and say we think it will cost this much to do an update or whatever it is that we think it would be, divided by X number of per holders and X amount per. I think you, and then you had your hand in the. So that's-
Yeah, like that, but that divided by the amount of people that are applying for that permit, not the people, not off of the backs of the people that are benefiting from it.
Yeah.
That was ugly. The idea, how much was it, the FEIR, how much did it cost to be state that enough? You said 100,000.
That's what I remember. I remember the allocation being initially like 350 and then a little bit more to come to it.
Yeah. If the 1,000, like, what's the justification? So I think we get it, like, what's the justification for that? It's not $1,000 for every permit fee, but the bigger permit fee is $1,000. If it was something where, like, because we already are gonna have to pay, my understanding is if I have an adjustment to my approved document, that I will have to pay for at cost of the review, what the time that takes for you to review it. So then why on earth I pay willingly this fee for a new EIR that would benefit raising the cap that could potentially not benefit, that have anything to do with it?
Would it help to just give some examples of why we would need at some point to the EIR?
It's an advantage that I see. If we had a more robust EIR, then we would have more of an ability to tier off of it. So you wouldn't have to do necessarily in a hypothetical world, initial studies, and then if we could appropriately tier off for other activities or expanded uses. But they were saying it's gonna take a while to see that return, so it's a really benefit.
And then the other, this sort of concept off the top of my head, in terms of why we might want to do that, is that my understanding in terms of the preparation of, you know, the existing EIR didn't really capture the reality of Trinity County, which at that time were known to be roughly 4,000 to 6,000 location sites. And so my understanding is that essentially they looked at, okay, how many state licensed farms do we have? And how many new state licensed farms do we expect to see? And then sort of put that into the 530 concept without taking into account the fact that there were many thousands of sites that have been developed. So, you know, again, I'm not exactly sure where we would land in the supplemental, but I think that if we wanted to, from an economic development standpoint and from a, you know, environmental protection standpoint, sort of encourage those sites to be maintained in some capacity, either through decommissioning them or turning them into cultivation sites, then there may be a path forward in terms of saying, okay, this is previously disturbed area in Trinity County. And so there's not as much of environmental impact from using previously disturbed cultivation sites for cultivation versus disturbing new area. And that's just something that's not sort of addressed at all in our current EIR. So that might be one reason that from the economic development standpoint, we want to be able to utilize the current land that has been disturbed rather than seeing it sit there and actually create more environment damage to not maintain than being actively maintained.
I'll come back to the reference next. I appreciate you giving some examples of why might, and I do want to kind of just acknowledge that if we think we're going to end the year at 390 active, and I hear people saying, don't charge me, period. But if you had 390 and they all paid $1,000, that'd be 390, which is what we paid for a full EIR in 1 year. So we really do need to look at the numbers of what we really need and when we really think we need it. And then what I'm hearing from this audience at least is, and consider, instead of getting it from the people who've been paying it through the general plan and other things, get it from the new folks. So I'm just summarizing what I'm hearing.
And just to add to that idea, Rick, I think that that's probably the way where, you know, we could certainly engage in trying to send out RFPs for the, you know, addendum or whatever additional sort of work on RDIR, and then work that backwards into a fee study to say, okay, we've got these bids through the RFP process. We know we're going to land in the $500,000 ballpark. We want to get it done in 2 years. We have this many number of active licenses. That means it's $250 a year for the next 2 years for the 500 licenses. Do the math through a fee study process rather than the sort of arbitrary concept carried forward. So that might be a way to essentially in this fee section, and that's something that we haven't touched on that is probably important. And we want to include these fees in a standalone fee section here in 1743, or do we want to basically make reference to the fact that we're going to do a periodic fee study and that the county fee code section will be updated accordingly as a result of the fee study? So that's something in this fee section that we need to work through where we want to land in that process.
That brings up another question, we didn't forget how many questions. A study would be great for all of it.
Well, it's happening, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
We've heard that.
Wow.
Yes, you have.
Yeah.
There's a new person.
Thank you, got it. All right, I worry about giving the fund for the VIR too much money and then somebody else in the county grabbing that money and doing something else with it.
Yeah,
It might be- That doesn't.
But I gotta finish that barn.
Right.
I know.
Okay. I hear you. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so
I'm not forgiving the county money ahead of time. On something that's not gonna benefit me at all. Problem is,
so Drew's suggestion to find out what we really need and then figure out the different paths that we could go through to get it.
yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah, especially for the young new people. Or the staffers, or whatever. Other thing was, if we put a termination date on fees like this. Like, hey, we're done with our general plan, let's not charge people for it anymore, you know?
Well, there always needs to be another general plan.
I want to for it.
Yeah, but just like for the $75 fees for alternate fees like that, you know, just that is.
I feel like if we don't need an EIR, let's take it off the fee thing, or let's put a termination date. You know?
Yeah, well.
General plans like every 10 years, I think Trinity got away with like what, 30, 50 years or something.
Yeah.
So every 50
And we're
years. What's the next?
I think our oldest part of the general plan is 4 years old, so. Carla, back here.
So, given all of this, yeah, the thing about the fees, like, no one has to qualify it, some of it. That's right. So I think some of us, like you're saying, the rules and stuff, like they know how much it actually costs, or I go there, things that it costs, and then based on that. So I think that's the right direction.
Okay, and your name, I'm sorry, Lauren. Lauren.
My one big question with the EIR, we said that in the first EIR, we had commercial licensees and we realized that there were thousands more. And my question is that those thousands extra employees been legal and license by the state and the county. So why do us as licensees, if it sounds harsh, but a pathway for them to get licensed after they had 7 years to get licensed seems like a slap in our faces for all of us putting the money in. Like there were 2 years of no operation for those 4,500 unlicensed farms did not set our staff up. And that's the race job for there, like it is in the back of the jar. So is it fair to charge us those EIR fees that we're paying to transition illegal grows just based on the fact like it's to start a land, like maybe a lot of done that 2 years ago, we could just to start the cultivation at the end of the day and then we did this and then look and pay my fees and get in the room. So that's my biggest concern with the EIR is why should us the place pay for people who ignore it and whatnot and all. So is that really
Okay.
I agree.
I agree. Okay, thank you.
So
Arlene, you remember?
yeah, I remembered, when we did the initial FDIR, we tried really hard. I kept saying this over and over. There's thousands and thousands of farms. And they kept saying they can't analyze them, cannabis is illegal and anything from the sequence is illegal. It's not. It's like it's not there. It doesn't matter that it's true. So has something changed? Because as far as that, in my mind, that's would still be the same issue. Unless that was just a lie. And
I mean, my take on it, Carla, is that what's changed is essentially that, I think it had more to do with Trinity County using the term license and the confusion and the lack of clarity between the county as the land use authority, the state as the licensing authority. So I think that my reading is that was sort of the source of confusion there. So
it seemed there's this thing that kept coming up, was like, no, illegal can't be in the sequence.
yeah,
I'm sure, but how is that different?
Adrian?
Yeah, elaborating on what Carlos said, that's absolutely true. In fact, they wouldn't even consider our farms who had been in the county system for the first number of years after existing, which did not install access to conditional exemptions.
And who is they in this?
Ascent Consulting, the folks that wrote the EIR. So we were all like, we were in the permits already, but we were denied pre-existing status, which, and I have not significantly altered my farm since then. I would have been conditionally exempted from this, my site specific document would be seen. As with, I think when we started the EIR, probably 3/4 of the farm. So there's some hurt feelings behind it. That's why some of us get really irritated about this, because Ascent, in my opinion, ripped us off. Double standard. Let's see, what was the other part? There was something much more constructive.
I'll state this and then give you a chance to think about that. One of the things I've kind of heard consistently though is when we're talking about the EIR, that tie it to who benefits. So if we think that the system that we need to create is going to primarily benefit X people, then figure out how we can tie the piece to those people instead of to people who will not benefit and who perhaps have been paying in for a long time and so forth. So that's a general kind of concept that I just want to make sure we capture. Did that give you a chance to? Okay, well,
We try, okay, we'll catch you tomorrow. So
Okay.
it'll come back.
yeah, so thank you for staying with us. We're just past 9 o'clock and feels like there was a lot of good conversation. We do have these notes we'll take back and a lot of notes here. We do have the session tomorrow night, in Weaverville and on Zoom. And we have it next Wednesday, in Weaverville and Zoom. And if I hear back from folks here that we need to be back here, I got heads nodding yes, that we'll come back.
That's
where-
just move next Wednesday to here.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the newspaper. That's what we gotta do.
We kind of had to see, but if we want to come back, yeah, we'll come back.
Legally required.
We know. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, my goodness. That was great. Rick.
Died about a minute, hour and 20 in.
Okay.